they see me? They see me. Okay, so welcome to everybody. My name is Umberto Berardi. As you can realize, it's kind of, I come here as a Canadian, but I'm really an Italian by root, by dad. So I was invited by Andrea and Professor Kutana a couple of months ago to give you this kind of series of lecture about innovative materials. The reality is that for me was an opportunity to put together all the things that we've been doing in Toronto over the last 5 or 6 years. Okay? So as I told you, I was born in Italy. I did my master thesis in Italy, and then I did a second master and PhD in UK. Then I moved to Boston. I was there as a faculty member for a couple of years, and then over the last 4 years I've been in Toronto. So what you're going to see today is really what has been going on since I moved to Toronto. So this was the first time for me to put together a presentation with nearly 300 slides, so don't be afraid about that. But I basically took all this little presentation given at different conferences, and so I'm trying to kind of create a path of what we have been doing over the years by showing you what we have been doing. So, before we start, I just want to tell you a couple of things. The title of this presentation and short course is Innovative Materials for High Performance Building, and then I put the subtitle, and the subtitle is Building Science Research. Now, for most of you, all of you probably are in Fisica Tecnica in Italy. Okay? Now, a real, translate Fisica Tecnica is building physics. If you go in North Europe, you typically hear the word building physics. So there is the word physics in what we do. But if you go to North America, and especially if you go to Canada, the physics disappears, and there is just the word science. Now, what that means, it's basically the fact that we don't really care too much about the physics aspect. We care about the science that can make actually building work. Okay, so the idea is that sometimes, often in Canada, people don't really care about the equation behind something that is happening. They simply want to have a kind of a scientific approach to solve a moisture or condensation problems. Right? So there is not really that much math. That's the reason why a lot of Italians are, welcome in Canada these days. Because the majority of my colleagues, they have no idea about equations. Okay? So if you go there with some understanding of thermodynamics, that's typically pretty worked. Because they don't really like to understand and modeling those kind of things. They just like to try to study those kind of things. And so I subtitled this talk Building Science Research at Ryerson. Ryerson is my university. It's one of the 3 universities in Toronto. We have the University of Toronto, which is the largest by far university, and then we have Ryerson and York University. So overall we have 3 different places. Now the University of Toronto, it's really kind of whole human-centered university. So they have a lot of departments and degrees about philosophy or political science and those kind of aspects. Ryerson University is the Polytechnic University of Toronto, which means we typically have the majority of our courses are in engineering and architectural or architectural science. As a matter of fact, my department is the Department of Architectural Science, which is another strange thing. So we issue a degree in architecture, but in all the diploma that we typically give to our students is called Architectural Science Bachelor or Architectural Science Master. And that word science, it's really giving you the feeling that in an architectural place, we try to put some science, and then when you see people like me with a PhD and master in mechanical engineering, then we try to use the science without actually making things too much complicated. Now, how many of you have been in Toronto? Probably not that many, and the reality is it's still a pretty unknown part of the world. Okay? As a matter of fact, last year we celebrated the 150th anniversary of Canada. Okay? Which really means Canada was discovered 150 years ago almost. So there wasn't really that much, and there is actually a lot of things ongoing in that part of the world. So this is actually an overview of the city of Toronto. Now the reason why I'm showing you this picture is because I don't have actually a pointer. No pointer. Well, okay. The gypsum will always work. So this is actually the financial center of Toronto. Typically people know the CN Tower, this kind of very tall structure built 15 years ago. And just to give you the sense of Ryerson University, this is our Ryerson Library University. This is biology, and this is physics. This is architecture, this is electrical engineering, this is civil engineering, this is mechanical engineering, this is our parking garage, and blah, blah, blah. So basically, we are speaking about a university that takes a huge portion of the city of Toronto and just really right downtown. From here to the lake that is going to be at the end of that street is typically 10 minutes walk distance. Okay? So we are, and this is important because if you go to a North American city, Toronto overall has 9 million people. Okay? So pretty large city. That, you know, if you own a huge portion of the city, you really can make an impact to what's going on in the city of Toronto. So this is, for example, the center I work for, which is called BTOP, and I'm going to actually present you the center in a while. So this is actually the opposite view of the previous slide. This is the city of Toronto. This is the typical landscape of a Canadian city, which is basically a huge suburb. And this is the historic financial district of Toronto. And in the middle, you don't see it because, you know, a university is not rich, so they like to do this kind of 2-3 floors building because we don't have the money. But basically, in the middle here, there is Ryerson University. So it's really there. Now, why I want to tell you this, you know, you probably will never be in Toronto, but there is something you should know. And what actually you should know is that the Ryerson University has the really great mission of acting to transforming the city of Toronto. So the majority of the studies we do are not really targeting a publication. That's just a lateral kind of effect of an academia. But the reality is that Ryerson University gets money from the government to transform the city of Toronto. Now, just to give you the impact of that kind of statement, the entire Canada is 32 million people. The GTA, the Great Toronto Area, which means Toronto and the neighborhoods, is around 9.5 million, which means a third of the country lives in Toronto. When you have, for a large country like Canada, 6,000 kilometers from east to west coast, you have a third of the population in one city. The government has really a clear statement and a mission to transform the way in which those kind of people are living. In other words, you know, when they give out money, they want to see publication, yes, but they want to see an impact in the way in which we transform the city of Toronto. And the city of Toronto is going through a huge transformation that basically is directed by the fact that, you know, these kind of row houses are being replaced by huge condos. You know, our generation loves to live in the city center. We don't love this huge gardening 2 hours apart from the core where we work. So everyone is basically moving here. We are making huge transformation of the city. And if you're a building scientist, you are actually interested in understanding what kind of city building you can have. Now, to give you the sense of it, look at this. Just to give you the city transformation. So this is, why doesn't it work? Oh, okay, now it works a bit better. So this is actually City of Toronto in 2000, and this is City of Toronto in 2014. Okay? In a while I'm going to show you what's going on right now in Toronto. But to give you this, the number behind that, there are 450 towers under construction. More towers in Toronto than in Chicago, San Francisco, and New York all together right now. Okay? And one interesting aspect of Toronto, this is only 10 years, okay? Look what's going on. So 10 years ago, it was like this, now it's becoming like this, already built 2014. And if you see the transformation in 2024, it's basically booming everywhere. This side of Toronto is booming, this side of Toronto has been demolished, and now it's building up. And typically they're building towers 70 floors high in order to house a lot of people. And the problem of this kind of rate of construction is when you need a huge number of towers in a very short amount of time, what they're doing is just glass tower everywhere. Now you make a glass tower, in the climate of Toronto, you have a lot of problems, okay? So the reality is our mission is try to understand how the construction sector can engage with a lot of sustainability principles while it's transforming at this rate. So that's actually basically my mission. It's my mission in my daily life, but it's also my mission with you this morning. Try to understand what we can do to make sure that Canada can become a better built environment place. Now, number one constraint, if you think about Canada, you think it's cold. Now we have a lake in front of us that is almost as big as the Adriatic Sea. So it's kind of a huge lake. Okay? And the lake, in winter time, it's frozen. Okay, imagine for 1 second then the Adriatic Sea gets frozen. Okay? The reality is frozen because we typically have -30 in winter time. Okay? So it's pretty, if you are a building science, if you are a building physics and you want to study this kind of principle, you need to take into account the fact that the first boundary condition, in winter time is pretty chill.
C'è un altro ragazzo, uno studente, Giuseppe Borghesi, che dovremmo chiamarlo via Skype.
Sure. Alright. So should I add it? Right, don't worry. So, I mean, just to tell you what's going on, this is actually the city of Toronto picture last January, okay? So it was -35, perceived temperature -40, pretty cold, and the lake was frozen. If you go back one slide, there was a little airport in an island that we have in front of the city of Toronto. You could walk from one side to the other one, okay? So it's pretty interesting to think about people skating, playing hockey on a lake, okay? When the lake is as big and as dangerous as this one. At the same time, just to give you another point of view of the climate of Toronto, a day like today, it's super hot. Not in line?
No.
Whenever it comes, we can all relax. So this is actually Toronto winter, 3 months ago. And I took this picture this morning, okay? This is really 2018. Today in Toronto, this is the temperature they are perceiving today, 32 Celsius. If you go to the perceived temperature, Block 2, which is the block of Toronto, the City Hall, was giving an alarm because today they are perceiving 38 degrees. Okay? So this is the first interesting boundary condition that you need to start thinking about. We are trying to make the built environment more sustainable, and we have to deal with a situation, and in winter maybe -40, and in summer maybe +40. Now, this is not really typically happening in the rest of the world. You know, you can have chilly places, or you can have warm places. But a situation where you have, you know, like 70, 80 degrees across the year is typically not that easy to manage. Because you start doing cross ventilation and it doesn't work in winter. You start doing thermal mass or other critical components in terms of thermal capacity of the envelope, and they don't work at all in winter, because in winter you start actually having a huge mass that you have to warm up. Then you go in summer and you have the opposite. If you put a lot of insulation, because you want to protect your building during the winter season, then in summer there are a lot of insulation trapped the heat inside the building, and the building never actually cools down overnight. So the conditions are not ideal. Okay? The condition is, basically the average temperature in January is -8. Okay? This is Wikipedia, nothing strange. Just to give you a sense, if you want to visit me, suggestion is spring, summer, fall. Forget about winter. The reason I want to forget about winter, last winter we had 62 days below zero, which means that for 62 straight days, we never saw 0 degrees. It was always -15, -20, the maximum was -6, 7, and then back to -20. So you have to deal with situations that are pretty critical, and then with situations that are 30 degrees in summer. So this is the weather data of the airport last year, 2 years ago. You see 34, 35 in summer, and then at the same time, you see this kind of -20, -25 in winter. It's pretty tough to manage, and it's pretty kind of dangerous when you are a building scientist. So what are we going to do today? Okay, and what are we going to do tomorrow? Basically, I'm going to present to you the case of what have we been doing in terms of trying to provide new solution to the building industry to make sure that they can sustain this problem. Okay? So I organized my presentation in terms of different blocks. The first block we will touch today, this is all we have to do today, so nothing more than this, is trying to introduce some nanotechnologies in the building environment. That means we are going to work with a very, very small nanoscale of 5 to 10 nanometers. Okay? So all the things you will see today, they typically apply at a scale as small as a few nanometers, basically. So the presentation is basically broken in a couple of pieces. We are going to start with phase change materials, and then we are going to move to aerogel. In the middle there is going to be a coffee break, just to kind of allow you to rest a bit. Okay? So we will do a couple of, I would say 1 hour about phase change materials and then probably 1.5 hours about hydrogens. Then tomorrow we will start kind of increase the scale of attention. We will focus first of all on building envelope systems, which basically means we are going to start working on polyisocyanurate, polyurethane, new polyurethane with aerogel, so some kind of building systems that you can start touching. And I'm going to show you some results, some new products that we have been developed, patents that we have arrived, some these kind of things. And then last but not least, in order to close the loop, the last hour of tomorrow's seminar, we are going to basically take back these nanotechnologies and we are going to apply those technology at the urban scale. In other words, we are going to see how to apply thermal energy storage approach, not anymore at the single level of a micro system, but at the level of the city of Toronto. Now these are all projects that, as you can imagine, we have been doing with different companies in the above part of the presentation, or with institutions such as the Province of Ontario, the City of Toronto, or other kind of large entities in Canada government. Okay? Question. So this is basically what we're going to do. Today this one, and then tomorrow this one. Okay? And if you're, so how, can I actually ask you first of all something? Can I know what's your topic of research? I know Nasha, she's doing daylighting.
Yeah.
So what's the rest of the group do? Right.
Radioactive materials and materials born.
Okay, so we are on materials.
Occupancy.
Occupancy.
Microthermal monitoring.
Okay.
Materials mostly.
Okay. So so you probably will find this interesting, but a bit different from what you have been doing for your thesis. So if something doesn't really make sense for you, please stop me. This doesn't have to be a really formal presentation. I put the tie today just to respect the place, but we can do whatever we want to do over the next couple of days. So feel free to stop me to say, Umberto, why this is happening. Like I'm not paid for the presentation, so I'm more than happy to kind of make sure that you enjoy it. You don't have to suffer this presentation, okay? So just to give you the sense of the value, I think actually I presented you the case of Canada already and the City of Toronto, but I think actually to give you a better perspective, one of the things you probably don't, oh yeah, here we are. So no, this doesn't work. One second, I'm just trying to add another person, which is one second. Do you know what to do to add this?
Sì, le studenti sono...
Is Giuseppe?
Giuseppe.
Easy?
Posso?
Ah, ragazzi.
I think he's not there because it's not been announced yet.
Ah, non è bene, a posto. Niente, lo chiamo io. Non ho un problema.
Okay, thank you so much.
Segui la
Okay,
domanda.
so far we just introduced the concept, we introduced what we're going to do today, we introduced the agenda of the talk, so we haven't yet really started, okay, so we haven't lost too much. This is just to give you the perspective, just a couple of slides to give you the number of what's going on. What's going on in the building sector is everybody's speaking about sustainability, everybody pretends to be super sustainable, energy saving, a lot of policies, a lot of efforts. But the reality at the end of the day is this trend. The trend is, no matter what we've been doing, the greenhouse gas emission or the energy demand in buildings over the last 30 years have been doubled and will double in the next 30 years. Okay? So the reality is, although we pretend to become better and better and better, in terms of increasing number of population, and in reality, in terms of increasing number of urbanization processes, so a lot of people moving to cities, the built environment will become in the next few decades, this is our projection, so these are actually forecasts for the next few decades, a bigger energy consumer, basically. Now this is, when you go to Canada, this is dramatic. Just to give you the sense, Canada is by far the country with the highest energy consumption for buildings. So the energy use intensity in Canada, on average, at the country level, it's 450 kilowatt per square meter per year. Okay? So when you target things such as passive house, 30 kilowatt per square meter per year, when you target things such as zero energy buildings, or nearly ones, so almost zero, we have actually an energy consumption rate that is typically in the range of 450. Okay? So that, to give you the sense, Italy currently has 110, 150 kilowatt per square meter per year as an average energy use intensity. So which means in Canada we consume 4 times more than what we consume in Italy. And the reality is, the reason for that is the fact that I was showing you before. When you have actually a thermodynamic situation with minus 30 outside, then you have to compensate 50 degrees in winter time. When you have actually plus 40 outside, which inside the building passively will become plus 50, plus 60, if you want to bring back a comfort level, you need to compensate 40 degrees with your air conditioning system. Put these two things in an equation where we typically pay a single kilowatt hour of electricity in Canada around 5 cents of Canadian dollar, which means 4 cents of euro, which means 1/4 of what you pay in Italy. And then you realize that our air conditioning system is always on, 24/7. So in my house, basically the air conditioning goes on January 1st, turns off on December 31st. Now office buildings, typically around the middle of May, we get an email from facility management in Ryerson University, and they say to us, sorry for the last few days of suffering, starting today, you're not going to more receiving heating system in your building, you're going to receive cooling system. So they switch from 1 to 1 on one day, which basically means that you don't have a place in the year where they don't use air conditioning system. Now over night time, it's so cold outside in winter time, then they never stop actually the heating system. It's just too expensive to stop the heating system. So the building is on all the time, no matter what you do. So when that actually becomes your house residential, that's a big problem, because when people use it, when Canadians use it to live in a row house, they typically use it a lot of biomass, which, okay, we're not really super environmental friendly, but we're easier to control. As soon as the population moves in these kind of towers, I personally live on the 55th floor. Okay? So you move in a condo that typically houses 5, 6, 7,000 people. Okay? So my condo has more population than my town in Puglia. Okay? Just to give you the sense. My town in Puglia is only 3,000 people. My condo is almost twice. Okay? So the reality is, in that context, you don't have control on the air conditioning system anymore. And if that's not enough, what's happening is, because these towers need to be built in basically 8 to 10 months, what they do concrete floor everywhere, no thermal breaker, no thermal breach protection, glass cladding attached to the floor. That's it. Okay? So the typical R value, so the U value in metrics is typically 1.2. Okay? So to give you the sense, it's 4 times more conductive than what you have currently in Perugia, but then you have minus 40 outside. Okay? So that's the typical situation. You wake up in the morning in a new tower, and the glass is frozen. You know, remember the Frozen cartoon? The reality is that these glass towers are typically frozen, which means you sleep overnight, you emit a lot of water vapor, the water vapor reaches the glass is so cold on the internal side, because outside is pretty cold, the condensation freeze actually on the glass. Okay? If you go on my Facebook profile in the morning, you see a lot of these kind of nice photos of the frozen glass. Okay? So our mission is try to understand how we can basically improve the comfort condition inside the building. So how can we actually do things in a good way? How can we actually make sure that the weather constraints become an advantage? Because please remember, they're also pretty good if you're able to manage. You know, today, it's going to be 36 in Toronto, okay? But overnight, it's probably not more than 9, 10 degrees. So if you're smart enough, the only thing you need to do is shift actually the cooling night capacity over the daytime, and that's it. But you need to understand how that can happen. When you go to winter time, same situation. Typically, the biggest problem we have in Toronto is that we need to start making sure that residential buildings and commercial buildings speak to each other, and we start using actually the connecting factor between the two. Now, one of the good things, for example, that we've been doing, the City of Toronto has been doing a cooling district system since 2003, and currently the majority of the buildings are cooled thanks to a lake effect. So what we do, we take actually hot water, we pump the water into the lake, the water comes back cooler, and then we make an exchange water to air, and we cool down actually the majority of the buildings in downtown. So there are actually things that we can do, and my actually kind of topic of research is how can we scale up this capacity? How can we make sure that this is not anymore an exception, but becomes actually the general approach for the City of Toronto? Okay, so first kind of subtopic in this part of the lecture. It's about thermal energy storage. So most of you know Luisa, I see a couple of people from LIDA, so these are all concepts that probably for the majority of you will be familiar. Luisa was here actually some time ago, so probably these are not new topics for you, but I want to give you a different perspective about these topics. So first of all, what it means actually thermal energy storage? It means that the material can actually store a lot of energy if you want. And what I mean actually if you want is it can actually store a lot of energy during a phase change from solid to liquid or from liquid to air. Now unfortunately the majority of the building codes, and also the only actually prescription you have in North American building codes is still about R value. I remember 10 years ago I was a PhD student visiting here in Italy, and there was the new regulation when they first put actually Energia of thermal mass in the code. They put actually that all the walls had to be at least 230 kilo per square meter. That was the first beginning of concept of thermal mass into the code. But in North America, you still only have R value. In other words, nobody cares about the thermal capacity of your walls. However, people have started realizing that, wait a moment, my glass tower without thermal capacity is just unbearable. Like, it's not really comfortable at all. There is nothing I can do to fix problems if I don't introduce some thermal mass. Now, the introduction of thermal mass probably can be explained by using a water analogy, just to give you the sense of it. Now, a single gram of ice to melt typically takes over 300 joules. Okay? That single gram of water to evaporate typically takes 2000 joules. Now in the middle, from 0 degrees to 100 degrees, the single gram of water to increase 1 degree at the time, it takes only 4 joules per degree. In other words, every single time a material goes through a phase change, which is typically almost an isothermal process, and when I'm saying almost, you will see in a while what that means in the building industry, the reality is there is a huge thermal capacity that you can store, and you can have actually then back release it when it means value for you. And that's exactly what we do with phase change materials. So we try to use materials that, look at this time. It's pretty hot outside, we have turned on the cooling system, but the reality is, what can we do to not turn on the cooling system, but have actually here a material that can take this heat that is coming from outside, store somehow, and then eventually release overnight, or eventually release in the winter time. What can we do actually to have these kind of things? And this is basically the concept behind latent thermal energy storage. So, in the building physics, you can have thermal energy storage in the sensible rate, which is what we are suffering today, because the temperature is increasing. Fair enough. You can have in the latent way, which is when you have a phase change, or you can have in an electrochemical way. Now, electrochemical way is not something we're going to touch today. We're going to basically focus on the latent way. So let's see actually what we can do on light and heat and what we typically do in Toronto. So in Toronto, we have been working quite a lot on the different properties of different PCMs. And the main constraints for us of interest is being, the cheapest possible phase change material we can realistically propose to the building sector to make sure that that material gets adopted by the building industry. Okay? So more than dreaming PCMs that are super expensive and super protected by patents, we typically work on new PCMs that we produce internally in my lab, and we make sure that those kind of products are so cheap that the economic barrier doesn't have to be a barrier anymore. Okay? Now, because we don't only work on labs, but we need actually to make an impact in the city of Toronto, the reality is we often actually work on real buildings. So what I'm going to show you today, it's a couple of outdoor lab experience, but also real buildings. So you will see actually today real buildings where we have introduced the PCMs. Okay? Now, from a, I would say, purely scientific point of view, some of these applications, if I present this application to colleagues, they will always criticize some levels. But please actually try to understand and align my mission. My mission is, I don't want to study things that remain in a lab. I want to study things that actually get applied, with all the limits that this may actually result. Now, last but not least, we are also trying to develop new PCMs, and I'm going to show you a few research on those kind of things. Now, the majority of my research gets done at 3 different levels. You will see the majority of studies done in this facility. So this is actually our, similar to your twins blockers that you have actually somewhere around here. We have a couple of similar entities on our roof. Okay? So climate chamber, fully controlled, fully equipped. We do basically tests in the middle of the summer, -50 to simulate the winter time and vice versa. Okay? And so this is the control room, this is the facade modules that we can change, these are the other facade modules that we can change. They can be completely rotated 360 and tilted 20 degrees in both directions. Okay? So we change it, the ceiling, we change it walls, we change the boundary conditions. These are separated units, can be coupled, can be separated, and we actually study these kind of things. And one of the things we study a lot is the airtightness, a concept that is not really common in Italy. It's not really common in a moderate climate or in a temperate climate, but when you start going to like a northern continental climate such as the Canadian one, the airtightness of a building is a big issue. Because if your building is not tight, the first stream of air that enters your building condensates and creates a lot of moisture issues. Okay? So, first of all, what kind of material we study? Now, I like to show this picture, and you will see another picture about aerogel, very similar to this one. Because the majority of people that do not work in the field of phase change material present to think that the phase change material is one material. Similar to the fact that the people that do not work in aerogel present to think that there is one aerogel. Okay? The reality is, these are kind of families of material. There are tons of different kinds of materials. And every single time you speak about this kind of system, you need to understand what kind of material are you referring to. Okay? Because different people speak about different things and they don't really understand each other. So in this kind of figure, what you see is different phase change material divided according to their temperature of transition, basically the temperature at which the phase change happens, typically from solid to liquid. So a material can melt at one temperature, another material melts at another temperature, and so these actually give you a different level of application. But then you see another kind of interesting properties of materials, which is how much energy that material requires and store when actually melts. So you typically see these in kilojoule per liter or in joule per gram, depending on the way in which the material wants to be assessed, if it is in the solid stage, so the gram, the mass, or in the liquid stage, so the volume, the liter. But it doesn't really change that much. So basically you can see that you have material that takes 100 joule per gram, or 200 joule per gram, or 300 joule per gram, or 400 joule per gram. So remember the water that was able to take actually 300 plus something joule per gram, and water melts from ice to water at 0 degrees is here. Okay? Water is just one kind of phase change material somehow. Then here you see a vast majority of other products. Now in a really ideal way, the best material, if you want to store a lot of energy, should have the highest possible melting enthalpy, and should basically be able to store a huge quantity of heat. So if I had to design in an engineering way my material, the idea is it should be always really here. So all these products are not really good because they don't really store a huge quantity of energy. Okay? Now just to anticipate what I typically do, I work with these kind of products, these very weak products. Okay? And you will understand why that's the case. But it's important that you understand there are materials that theoretically could store much more energy than the materials I work with. Now another thing that you see here is that some products have a transition temperature in the range of 200 or 300 or 400 degrees. Now do we reach those temperatures in buildings? No. So are we interested in those products for building applications? No. But if you're working in the industry sector and you want to do phase change processes for industrial application, then typically this temperature makes more sense for you. And in fact, Luisa, just to give you an example, often works with products that are here. Huge actually enthalpy, so huge density of possible energy storage, and temperature that are high. That's okay. We compartmentalize, we put actually some insulation around the material, and the material still work. Now, because I work only for buildings, I typically work in kind of products that are here. There are a phase change that is between, I would say, between 10 and 40 degrees. Okay? So, the materials of interest for me are in this range. What material we have? We have paraffins, we have hydrates, and we have some kind of salt. Okay? So those are the materials I'm a bit more familiar. The other ones typically are beyond my actual interest. And in reality, I've been working mainly over the last few years on paraffins, although I will show you some kind of real application of salts too. Now, why we use those products? Just to give you the sense of the value of these products. So number one, they melt and they freeze back at the same temperature. A lot of PCMs have one problem. They melt at one temperature, and when you freeze back, they freeze at another temperature. We call that subcooling effect. The fact that in the freezing mode, so when the material cools down, it cools at a slower temperature. That's the reason why we call it subcooling. Now this is not a big problem, but the reality creates a lot of control issues. And we don't like actually control issues because our habitants, people in buildings are really lazy, they don't want to do anything, they don't want to touch the envelope. So we need actually to have products that are really stable. We need to have products that are melting and freezing at the same temperature. So we want to avoid those kind of problems. Second, actually, characteristics. We don't want hysteresis. What is hysteresis? Hysteresis means that basically the product can go cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle and not having actually any problem. It's very stable. Okay? It can do thousands of cycles and still not having any change. Salt typically have a hysteresis process. Over 1,000 cycles, they start to lose their properties. What that means? It means your battery. Look at this battery. Okay? The battery of my cell, when I purchased the cell, was lasting 2 days. 2 years later, only lasts 3 hours. Okay. Now, for a battery, you know this is the case. You throw away the battery, you don't care about that. But if that's actually your wall, what are you going to do? Are you going to throw away your wall? You don't want to do that. Okay? So for you, basically in the built environment, the fact the material needs to be stable and not showing any kind of process that changes over time, it's quite important. Okay? So that's actually a boundary condition of why we work on these products. Okay? And pay attention, I'm still speaking about products, because paraffins, there are thousands of different paraffins. Okay? So it's not easy actually to select the right one. Okay? If you see this picture again, you see here a huge family. You have products that actually melt below 0 degrees, above 100. They actually can take a low energy enthalpy of 100 or up to 200. So what's the product we are going to work with? So to select a product you typically want to work, these are some of the these are some of the properties you need to take into account. Just to really give you a sense, in a very brief term, you have the presentation, I'm happy actually to be reached later on, so whatever question you have, feel free actually to ask me. But basically what you want to have is pretty high entropy, very stable, very similar volume in solid and in liquid phase. Think about your water. If your water gets frozen, increase the volume, okay? So do you want actually your wall to increase the volume if it gets frozen or melted? Then your kind of plaster will crack, you will have a lot of problems. So you cannot really risk these kind of things. So volume stability is important, long-term duration is important, subcooling is kind of important, and last but not least, cost. The majority of the phase change materials, but also the majority of the aerogels that a lot of researchers worldwide are studying, are pretty expensive. So for me, my typical approach is I want to work with the cheapest possible product. It may be not perfect, it may have a lot of troubles, but it has to be cheap. It has to be affordable for the building industry in the range of a couple of years, okay? And I fully respect people working on better products that may be worldwide in 10 years from now, but that basically is not our mission or rise, okay? We get actually supported by the government only if we produce kind of incremental innovation. We don't do transformative innovation, we do step-by-step guidance to the building industry. So, parafines, big family. Typically this is the chemical formula. I don't want to kind of stress you with chemical formulas too much this morning, but the reality is, depending on the number of carbon you put, it changes actually the temperature at which freezing and melting is happening. Okay? So you can have a chain of carbons that is longer, and it will actually melt at a higher temperature. It may be shorter, and it will actually melt faster and at a lower temperature. Okay? So you can actually play with these kind of things. Typically, the density of storage is no more than 200 joule per gram, so 200 kilojoule per kilogram. So it's not huge, it's not the best one, but it's actually cheap. Okay? And that's what he has to do. So, a couple of actually application of these products. Okay? When I speak about paraffines, typically we introduce paraffines in building product through 3 different ways. First one, incorporating the product into a typical porous product. Think about a plastic. Think about a concrete. Think about product that you melt together and you shape together on the site. Then you can have actually this sense that you can add to that product and get actually that process. The majority of actually products we have been studying is basically through immersion. So we have typical products that we immerse in a liquid bath of PCNs, and then we make sure that that kind of product doesn't get leakages. So the product has to be stuck in that product. So to give you examples, so this is an house that I designed in 2012. It's a zero energy, typical solar decathlon house. We built the house. We went to the competition, we won the competition, and if you see this house, you probably don't like the design, that's okay, don't worry, I wasn't the architect, but the reality is, it doesn't look as a typical zero energy building, because the envelope is fully transparent, with the exception of this wall that was partially opaque. This side, that side, and the other side were fully transparent, okay, fully glazed, assembled on site. That's a very bad way to start with zero energy building design. The fact that you don't optimize the windows to wall ratio, the fact that you got almost 100 windows to wall ratio, doesn't really make any sense. But the reason why we started in this way is because towers in Toronto are fully glazed. So we wanted to study how to make a fully glazed tower worldwide for energy saving principles. Okay? Now the fact that it's fully glazed, it's a value somehow, because that means you get a lot of solar gain, and in the middle of the winter time, the solar gain is free energy. So peak time, midday, January, it's minus 20, but the fact that the solar gain is pretty high, in the range of 800, 900 joule in terms of density, that means actually you can reach easily comfortable levels in the summertime. Now the problem of that, this is actually a picture from inside, the problem of this house is that this huge solar gain was a big problem in summertime. Okay? So we have to control this. Now, one way to control possibly was through some kind of shading design. This was a shading design that, you know, kind of was dimmable, so was changing, was dynamic, blah, blah, blah. But here we are describing actually application of nanotechnology. And one of the first things we did in 2013 was to this house. This house is still in Toronto. We still actually play with this house. We have students visiting, living in the house, doing some interaction with this house. One of the things we did was actually starting studying a floor full of PCMs, or the gypsum boards full of PCMs. Okay? Now, this house participated to the solar decathlon in China. So imagine you build a house in kind of Toronto, and you have to ship to China. So thermal mass is not an option using typical thermal mass approach. You don't want to have a heavy structure to go. Everything had to fit into a container, and the container had to be shipped to China, be closed back into the container, and come back to Canada. And the shipping container was basically paid based on the weight of the container. So we decided, okay, we don't want any actually idea element. What we actually designed for this house when we went to China was this micro tile of kind of 8 millimeters of concrete with a lot of PCM inside. It was the first kind of interesting approach to look at mixes of PCMs in different concretes. So we look at the different PCMs in the concrete mix and study the effect of it. Okay? So I'm going to show you very briefly the principles of the results of this. But the idea is pretty simple. You have a lot of solar gain. This solar gain will make the indoor environment really discomfortable, and you want to have this solar gain to be stored somehow inside the building. We started from the concrete tile, we move it actually to the gypsum boards, so all the internal walls, then we move to the glasses and a lot of different interactions. So I'm going to show you the majority of these interactions briefly. So the first application we did was actually at that time, 2013, introducing different vast micronal actual spheres into the concrete. So this was a kind of a proprietary PCM. So this was a PCM that you had to purchase it. So at that time we were still working with products that were slightly expensive. Then we moved forward and we said no more these kind of products, they will never make actually easy access to the market. But what we were actually doing was introducing this pounder, very, very fine sand pounder of PCMs, microencapsulated PCM, paraffine, into the concrete mix while we were creating the concrete mix. Okay? So the substitution was typically in the range from 10 to 25% in the volume of the concrete, which was pretty high. In mass was very, very limited, typically from 2 to 6% of mass of PCMs. The PCMs, different PCMs were characterized. Here you can see the material was melting at one temperature and was freezing basically at the same temperature, which is what I was telling you before, no subcooling. When a product has a subcooling, typically the blue curve peaks at one temperature and the black curve peaks at another temperature. In other words, the material doesn't melt and freeze at the same temperature. So this was the first kind of interesting aspect we wanted. The second one was about the entropy that was able to be stored here. The third aspect that actually is also pretty interesting. When you have an ice and you go to high school, but even in physics 1 in an engineering school, they typically tell you that the process of phase change is isothermal. So when the ice moves from being solid to liquid, all the process happens in an isothermal way. When you want to cook your pasta, you put water, turn on the gas, starts the boiling. That is an isothermal process. The water will stay at 100 degrees until everything evaporates. Now, the problem is once you start putting PCMs in products that do not go to a phase change at that temperature, the phase change is doing actually a latent phase change, so it's kind of isothermal, but the rest of the mass is still getting actually some temperature. So the mix of a PCM into a natural product is not isothermal anymore. And that's basically represented here. So the process starts at one temperature, but takes several degrees to happen. And you need to start controlling how this Gaussian is moved or peaks very brutally. So the majority of PCM studies at this time are basically working on how that Gaussian is kind of wider or shorter. Okay? And here are the effects of the products. basically you can see that without the PCM, same house, you know, what the effect? Without the PCM, it was building up more and more solar gains and was peaking internal temperature at the range beyond 35 degrees, so clearly discomfortable. And then the blue line is the same house with these concrete tiles, and you can see this kind of temperature stabilization process where basically the product stores a lot of the internal gains and the temperature gets much more stable than before. So the swings over the day, you know, without the phase change was kind of significantly beyond 10 degrees, while with the phase change, basically the swings was only in the range of 5 to 6 degrees. And so night and daytime were compensated each other. Couple of other studies were looking at the phase change into the concrete mix. Don't see that much, probably. Do you see it? More or less. So this is, for example, the amount of energy that we could store in terms of capacity for different percentage of PCMs. So no PCM at all, and then in mass 1%, 3%, or 5% of PCM. This is one characteristic of the PCM, but we use a different PCMs. And I don't have time actually to show all the results, and probably if you're not in PCM, well, it's also not worthy. But the reality is, what you can see is, you can start working depending on the amount of energy you want to store in terms of different capacity of the product. Now you also see it's not incremental. 1% doesn't give you a huge effect, 3% gives a huge effect, and then 5% doesn't really give that much. And the reality is, heat transfer in the concrete mass was basically creating different types. The problem is, the more PCMs you put, the PCM is typically a rubbery material, the more material actually gets soft. So the softer becomes the final product. So if you have a concrete mix, what kind of product you might want to do? It's typically not for structural application, so you don't do the beams of the column of the concrete building, but for kind of slabs, or for actually mortars, or for any other actually similar applications, these are still pretty okay products. The compression strength gets pretty reduced significantly, but we still use concrete in so many different applications. And base glacier concretes by itself are materials with a good thermal capacity, but the phase change increased the capacity of a concrete product by far. Okay? Another thing that actually we looked at more recently, this was basically in the last couple of years, was gypsum boards. Okay? So we have all these towers that in Toronto have been built over the last decade. What can we do for these kind of boards? And the easiest actually way to retrofit this kind of high-rise is by changing the gypsum boards. Now in North America in general, we don't have plasters, we have gypsum boards. The gypsum boards get basically screwed in and out very easily within the day. So that was actually by far the easiest way to kind of reconvert this kind of high-rise buildings. So we started working with different companies. So we had actually the patent with BASF about PCM gypsum boards that they are currently manufacturing and selling, not in Italy. It gets actually sold in Germany, Austria, UK, and US. Okay? So what we have been doing is basically introducing different micronaut products in the gypsum boards. Now, we work actually with different products. Just to give you an example, this is an overview of products currently in the market that you can almost go on Amazon and buy with PCMs inside. Okay? So, typically, plaster boards, little panel, blanket, tile. So these are very, very thin layers. Just to give you the sense, the thickness of these layers, you know, they go from a couple of centimeters to as actually thin as 5 millimeters. So very, very thin boards. In this kind of boards, typically 2 by 2 meter or 1 by 2 meter, you typically get a lot of PCMs. You need to select the PCMs depending on the temperature you may want to have the phase change. You need to kind of establish the latent heat of fusion that you may want to have. And last but not least, a property that I never spoke so much, it's about thermal conductivity. So these are products you can almost buy, okay? So you go to an Amazon for your house and you buy this product and then you put behind the wall. Very simple. Now what's typically happening when you buy this product is that you put something behind the wall and you pretend that that product is going to store a lot of the heat, and that's not happening. Because the heat goes through other direction and it doesn't really pass into the wall. And even if it touches the external layer, it doesn't propagate. Because typically paraffin has a very small thermal conductivity. So the thermal capacity is big, but the process, the speed of this, it's pretty slow. To give an analogy, is this battery. Okay, you buy this battery. The battery, in terms of capacity, gives you how many hours you can have phone call. Okay, but how fast is this to charge or discharge is a completely different property. And in thermal properties, this is actually depending on the thermal conductivity. Now, the majority of the work we have been doing these days is about how to incrementally look at products with a very, very good thermal conductivity. Now, most of the paraffins have a thermal conductivity in the range of 0.2 bar meter Kelvin. So it's not kind of very good for propagating heat. Now, they're not insulating. You know, a typical insulating material will have a 0.05, 0.06. So they are more actually conductive than an insulating material, but they're not as conductive as a concrete. So a typical concrete has a conductivity in the range of 1.2 watt per meter Kelvin. Okay? So these are still pretty insulating products. In other words, the heat arrives, but it doesn't propagate into the mass. And if the product is starting being thick, you know, a couple of centimeters, the effect never happens. It takes so long to happen, there is already night and day. So one of the series of studies we have been doing, what kind of addition we can have in these products to make the energy storage propagating faster. And it's not really different from what you have in your phones when you're looking for the supercharger, the fast charger that, you know, charge your phone in an hour. Same story. The solar gain arrives. How can I make sure that this product is a calamite and, you know, magnetically attract all the heat in a very fast way? Okay, so this is typically the direction of study we've been doing. Another kind of direction of study we have been doing on a couple of towers. These are real towers built in Toronto by an Italian general contractor from kind of Umbria, so that's probably something worth you to know. Tridel, it's actually three brothers from Umbria, Del Zotto the name, so the three Del Zotto brothers call it the name Tridel. And this is one of the largest actually kind of general contractor in Toronto, and what we did a couple of years ago was trying to work with different products in a few towers they had. Now, why this was important, this was actually a project financed by the City of Toronto, was they wanted to understand what kind of these products made more sense. Now, if you have to select these products, then you're the engineers, okay? So you're just the energy consultant that has to provide some suggestion to this company. What you see in this table is, okay, well, Umberto told me that I should always use products with a very, very high enthalpy. In other words, this product makes more sense than this or this. And the reason for that is this is going to store 200 joule per kilogram. This only store 10 or 25 joule per gram, so kilojoule per kilogram. So in other words, this doesn't have a huge capacity. So they don't really going to make a huge impact. So theoretically speaking, this makes more sense. Unfortunately, there are a lot of problems with those kind of products. And so this product, for example, suffer hysteresis, suffer subcooling. So how can you actually use these products effectively? Can we go here and pretend to have low density, but, you know, a more stable product? So this is the kind of study we were looking at. Applying these products in different units and try to evaluate and assess pros and cons of different applications. One of the things you see here is the melting temperature. So is my phase change, you know, ideally should have a phase change at 20 or 22, 23, 25, 27. What's the best phase change that you want to use? And how should I actually select the best temperature of transition in a building? Because, you know, we are entering in a world of dynamic envelopes. When we speak about insulation, we understand the lower the thermal conductivity, the better. So lowest thermal conductivity always wins. Easy. Okay? But when we look at these dynamic properties, we need to understand what the building is doing. And the reality is, do we really know what the building is doing? Do we really know what's the preference set point of the cooling system of the unit? Do we really know what the occupant, for people doing occupant, will prefer in these buildings? You know, do we have an understanding if these people will set point the temperature at 20 or 23 or 25? And what's going on if I select the product for 25 and then the person already sets 20? And trust me, Canadian, like America, like people in New York, put the cooling system in summertime at 16 degrees. Okay? So you make actually all the evaluation at 26, and then they have 16 inside. What that means is that your phase change board gets frozen at 16 degrees and never melts, never acts, because never goes to 26, where you will have the dynamic effect of this product. So the fact that you have these problems makes actually kind of another interesting topic of research to look at this. And if that's not even actually enough, then you need to understand that different orientation of the building in a climate such as Toronto means different solar gains. And different solar gains mean different actually radiant temperature. Different radiant temperature means different comfort condition inside. Boom, everything gets broken in a bunch of different conditions. So, you know, different kind of results. Just to give you an idea of a study that was published a couple of years ago. One of the problems of phase change materials for people working in this field is that they act at a good temperature and they don't really are active anymore at another temperature. So the majority of application that we have been looking at is, you know, for summer thermal energy storage. Because in summertime, you don't want actually to kind of get overheated inside. And so you don't want to have a huge cooling demand in the middle of the peak of summertime when outside it's actually super hot and inside you need to use a huge cooling. But in a city like Toronto, we also have the similar but different effect during winter time. Because if you come in my office, for example, huge solar gain, huge internal gains, computers, people, even in winter time, we get a pretty good cooling demand. And unfortunately, overnight, it's -20 outside. You could easily cool down your building by using fresh, kind of chilly air in the middle of the night. So how do you balance the capacity that you can have if you're able to kind of shift the cooling power you have overnight into the daily actually profile of your building that otherwise is actually having another cooling demand? Now the way in which we typically look at this is by starting coupling different phase change products. So instead of a single product that only works at one temperature and eventually only will work in one actually season, we start coupling different products, clearly in thin panels, so you know, panels of 3, 4, 5 centimeters, but with different product, with different phase change, and we work actually at which condition one or the other are actually going to be working. Okay? So this is the kind of direction of research that is happening worldwide. So you're not the only one working in this field. Clearly, it's a general trend worldwide. And we have people working with different products. You know, some products working at temperature of transition of 17 degrees. This gypsum board, the bio-PCM works at 25. The Energia works at 21. And the idea is by kind of having different temperature of working, you are making sure that the product works in the winter season, summer season, and transition season. Okay. Now, so this is basically like one of these products. Now we also worked by coupling all these products together, and the result wasn't really effective. So if you start chumping all the PCMs in one single panel, so you destroy these original panels, you take the pounder, you mix all together, you put the gypsum board, and you block all the panels together, the result is not as effective as you have in layers that are different each other. And what I typically do is, so look at this. This is the bio-PCMs. This is a product that was developed in Boston 5 years ago. It's still actually on the market, and it's typically quite cheap. Okay, it's one of the cheapest possible PCMs that you can actually buy. It's a paraffin product, fully kind of recyclable, pretty stable, and more importantly, it has actually a density of around 200 joule per gram. So it's a huge thermal capacity. Unfortunately, only actually has a transition in the range of 26 degrees. And the reality is probably here right now we have 23, 24, or typically in an Italian building, 26 degrees, it's okay. But in North America, an American guy, 26 degrees will never actually sustain that temperature. So these products typically do not work at all there. Because nobody wants their house actually to be at 26. Okay, they are super in love with this chilly air in the middle of the summer. Then the only product that work effectively are the ones around 19, 20 degrees. Okay, so just to give you, do you want to have a break? Tell me when you want, okay? No problem, okay? I have no real thing. So I put actually some slides to give you an overview of this. I just want to jump to kind of the results to show you what we've been doing in terms of experimental thing, okay? And then all the presentation will have all the results, not to mention that I actually put together some kind of papers into a folder that has been shared with Professor Kodana, and not to mention that, you know, all these kind of things are one by one in different papers, so you can always refer to the original paper to get an idea. So we started 5 years ago with these small kind of test cells, and these test cells were only actually a meter by 1 meter, okay? So they were not really big. Now we started scaling up. We did the experimental in full test scale, 3 meter by 3 meter, and now we did the entire apartment, okay? And what actually we have been looking at is the kind of different effect of different PCMs and different boards in very, very thin layers. Now, best result, just to give you the sense of in Toronto. And when I'm saying Toronto, because you know all these studies are climate dependent. You do the same study in Perugia, you get different results because the boundary conditions are going to be different. The weather is not going to swing as in Toronto. While in Toronto, the fact that it's very chilly overnight helps us in terms of doing a lot of thermal storage. And in fact, we did the same study with a colleague in Vancouver. Vancouver phase change materials do not really work that well. But when it gets actually warm there, it gets warm also during the night. And when it gets windy and chilly from the ocean effect, it gets chilly through the day. Okay, so Toronto is a kind of a strange combination. Very tough to survive, but very interesting swing of temperature over the day. So typical condition that we basically managed to have. This is actually the result of the Tradal units. Okay, so this is a real building. Each unit was 100 square meter, so kind of a typical apartment unit. And these are the results with side-by-side units with the PCMs boards and without the PCM boards. In this case, the PCMs were 2 centimeter boards, 7 millimeter, 7 millimeter, and 6 millimeter of different phase change. Okay, so we were basically working on combined package of effect of different layers. And what we typically obtained is kind of a peak reduction of the temperature of a few degrees. Typically from 4 to 6, 7 degrees Celsius passively, and typically a shifting peak, especially in the sound orientation, of a couple of hours. In other words, you don't get any more the maximum temperature when the electricity is highest in price, but you can actually the peak at different time. This is one of the most interesting kind of demand for Toronto right now. The city of Toronto is kind of an old city, of 150 years old. Now all this population is moving toward the center of the city. As soon as the population moves toward the center of the city, the infrastructure, the electrical grid is super old. Okay? And doesn't sustain anymore the fact that at the same time everybody is turning on the current system. So one of actually the most interesting things, and this is something we will touch again tomorrow at the end of the day, is the fact that we need actually to really shift the energy peak. Because the electricity peak basically makes a lot of risk of blackout. So, has been happening already year after year after year. As soon as actually you get a heat wave, the electricity grids start suffering and they need actually to turn off something, otherwise they don't have enough electricity. So a pretty good demand these days for buildings in terms of tax revenue. That's interesting for as a model for Italy. The way in which the building permit gets issued, typically in Toronto, is that if you can show that your building will do something better, your property tax, which is your EMU, it's going to be lower. So the city of Toronto gives revenue for buildings that testify a more environmental friendly approach in their design. So even the general contractor has an interest in this kind of sense. It's not really driven by the client. There is such a huge demand that whatever they build, they're going to sell right away. So it's not really the customer that drives the sustainability agenda, but it's the fact that actually the taxes associated with that construction gets lower. Okay? And so this is actually the Tradal case for different units, south-oriented and west-oriented. And what you can see is on the light green area is that the peak gets lower and the temperature over the night time gets actually higher. These are actually hours of the day. So this is the 2016, the 3 of July, the July the 3rd, July the 4th, July the 5th. then you can see actually the swings of the temperature gets much more mitigated, delaying the peak, and temperature reduction in the range of 5 to 6, 7 degrees. Okay? A couple of other effects. We worked on the effect of shading. Because one of the things when we study PCMs, in lab, they work perfectly. We put in the DSC, we do the thermal characterization of the product, they seem to store a huge amount of energy, everything seems perfect. You go to the site, first thing that people do, they change the thermostat, and gets destroyed. The second one is the blind effect. In the occupancy kind of model, there is a very kind of small amount of understanding of blinds effect. But the blinds affect the thermal radiation, and that's affect actually the phase change properties. So one of the study we did in these kind of things is we monitor curtain model of views in order to understand the PCM's actually effectiveness. Now, and this is where you start seeing the building science agenda coupling different sides of the physical technique in Italy. So we never actually thought about people, but then by studying dynamic envelopes like a phase change, so a product that changes with the time, you need to start taking into account what's going on with the shading effect. You need to start taking into account what's happening with different set points. And these are actually the results. So typically, if you had actually a shading effect that was kind of well working, then the PCMs was able actually to reduce the peak of 8 degrees. If the shading was kind of lazy, so the person wasn't really properly adjusting the shading depending on the sun was or wasn't there, then the effect was only actually a few degrees, 3 to 4. And this gives you the sense of another interesting fact. You can put a lot of money in PCMs or in any other high-tech technology buildings, but if the occupant doesn't help you in properly managing that kind of technology, you still suffer a lot of kind of reduced effect of these systems. Okay? Another thing that we worked with, for example, was educating the person to night ventilation. So the phase change material, the only thing it does is store some level of energy in the day. Okay? But that energy needs to be released overnight, otherwise it's your battery. If your battery is being discharged and you don't recharge overnight, what's happening the next day? You don't have your smartphone, because your battery is still basically dead. Okay? So you need to recharge your battery. And when it comes to a PCM, you need to basically cool down your system to make sure that the system has a lower set point at the early amount of the day, they can actually increase the temperature overnight. And you know, ancient people used to call it night ventilation. It's not really a difficult concept, you know, overnight, when the sun is not there, please open your window, cool down your envelope, and make sure your envelope gets cold, being ready for the next day. But what that means when you have a tower. Now what that means, just to give you the sense, in my actually house, my condo unit apartment has windows of this size. Okay? Because everything is glazed, but then they don't want us to go outside, so we don't have balcony, and we only have these kind of little windows at the bottom of the floor for a small amount of fresh ventilation. The rest of the ventilation gets centralized from an air conditioning system commonly happening for the entire building. So we're working on different ventilation rates, okay? And the effect of different ventilation rates for different kind of study. Now, to give you the sense of the ventilation rates, optimum ventilation rates was kind of in the range of 1.5 liter per second per person. So, you know, you need to start coupling together the ventilation with the PCMs to start seeing the effect. We worked on the effect of different PCMs, okay, not only as a coupled material, but one by one. And we saw actually the effect if this little tile was put on the ceiling or was put on the walls or was putting on different orientations. Now typically you understand the effect. Thermodynamics and convection will tell you that warmer air will sink, and then so if you want to control the heat wave in the summertime, probably the ceiling is the best position of your product. But the problem is, it is the best position of the product, so you should use PCMs more on the ceiling than on the walls. But on the other side, the wall sometimes gets direct radiation of the sun. So the surface temperature may be higher because, you know, that wall gets some sun for some hours of the day. And so one of the kind of studies that you can actually look at is, here we are, you can look actually the effect of different PCMs for different sides of your unit. Okay? So just to give you the results, we realized that south-oriented facades are the best one PCMs. East and west are not really that optimal. They typically suffer this internal gain that is pretty high. North facades are okay. So, you know, if I need to suggest somebody where to invest money, south and north are the best. East and west not that really good. If you're on the east and west, typically PCMs should be used more on ceilings or floors and not that much on walls. Okay? So you start actually working on the best optimal combination of products, but also on location of those products. Couple of last two slides, and then actually I will give you a break. I told you one of the things we are working these days is using kind of cheaper products. Okay? You probably do not know, but Canada is famous for 3 products. Wood, we basically sell the entire wood of US, and then, you know, wheat and cereals, which we actually sell a lot to Italy, and pigs. Okay? Canada is by far in the world the largest actually population of pigs. And basically it's happening in the middle of Canada, where nothing is happening beyond that. Okay? So there's nobody there, so we can actually huge farms with tons of farms and pigs. So those pigs actually allow us to have huge quantity of fatty acids, so kind of oils. Okay? Bio-oils that we don't have any idea what to do with it. So over the last couple of years, we've been working on those kind of oils to make sure that we can encapsulate those oils with polymers, so basically high pressure polymerization of the oil, and making sure we can create a bio-PCM. Now the value of these products becomes extremely cheap. Actually, they pay us to take that oil. Okay? That is a kind of a waste for them. They don't know what to do. And that polymerization is pretty simple process. The product remains super cheap. So for people interested in finishing materials that are not really expensive, this is a possible direction. But that has a couple of problems. Problem number 1, call it subcooling. Charging, discharging. Okay? The mode is the same, but the temperature at which the peak occurs slightly differ by 3 degrees. In other words, controlling actually subcooling is not really kind of easy. Second problem, hysteresis. So the problem does the first actually 200-300 cycles well, and as soon as you start putting actually 6, 7, 8, over 1,000 cycles, it starts reducing actually the effect. Now what that means? Well, it means that if this problem has to do a daily effect, so charging and discharging every single day, summer and winter, after a couple of years you start losing the effect. So that's a big problem. The product is used for kind of seasonal storage, so only summertime. Then typically, you know, no more than 50, 60, 70 cycles per year. Then you can actually have a product that lasts 10 years. Okay? And same effect of your battery. If you actually not use your battery that much, your phone never gets used, you know, your mom's phone and gets charged once a week, your battery lasts 3 years. If you use your phone so much that every day you need to charge twice, then probably after 1 year the battery needs to be changed. Okay? Another problem of these bio-PCMs is kind of related to their thermal conductivity. Bio-PCM have a typical thermal conductivity of 0.01 watt-meter Kelvin, which is very, very low, but we need to increase their thermal conductivity. So typically this kind of increase is happening by putting a wax, so the typical wax of your candles. We are doing actual experiments with that. We are doing actual experiments with erythritol. We are doing experiments with graphene. And basically the idea is, this is a typical PCM, the magic of the PCM. We drop actually an highly conducting material into the porosity of the PCM to make actually the PCM more conductive. Okay? By having a more conductive PCM, we make sure that this kind of charging and discharging process gets faster, and so the product can be used when actually the shift in temperature is actually happening very actually fast. Okay, so do you want to do a break and then we come back? Are you okay? I see already you're actually missing person. I have little control on the people on Skype, which is kind of not easy. So let's see what's going on. Okay, let me write that. Hour a bit, an hour and a quarter, hour and 20 we can finish. So, second topic of the morning, a different nanotechnology. It's kind of probably our main kind of research center focus over the last few years, which is about hydrogens. How many of you have ever heard about the work? Because here in Perugia there are a few people doing it quite well. And so I'm going to present you a kind of a slightly different perspective on this material, which is what we have been doing in Toronto, which is kind of synthesizing a different aerogel ourselves. So we use our own aerogel product, basically. So what is this product? So if you compare different insulating materials, here is a kind of a comparison chart showing you the thickness that is needed in order to have an R value of 1 in imperial units. We basically see that, more or less all the materials have similar thermal conductivity products, but then over the last few years we have been seeing an increasing demand of new super insulating products. Now, what is a super insulating product? It's basically a material whose thermal conductivity is well below 0.02 watt-meter Kelvin. Okay? So these are products that have a very, very small thermal conductivity, and as a result you can achieve the same thermal insulating effect with a much thinner layer. So the value of these products is basically shown in this picture. You get the same thermal conductivity, but then the material is very thin, so it can be used a lot in retrofitting application, and especially in Toronto it can be used quite effectively because you don't use a lot of internal space. And to give you the sense of the value of this advantage, currently in Toronto we pay around 12,000 Canadian dollars, so basically 9,000 euro per square meter. So when you purchase a place, it costs you 5-6 times what it will probably cost in a medium-sized city in Italy. And so given that kind of result, and given the kind of chilly environment that we have in winter time, it's pretty important to have R values that are high, and typically Toronto trends currently are pushing around R values around 20, which with a normal mineral wall of fiberglass or rock wool or whatever will mean 25-30 centimeters of thickness of insulation. That will mean a lot of actually cost. So there is actually a demand of super thin insulating layers being able to give you the same impact. Now there are basically two materials that can do that. One is the vacuum bundles and the other one is the aerogel. Now what they do, vacuum basically creates a vacuum and so stops any kind of gas conductivity or convection heat transfer. Okay? So it is pretty effective and it really, theoretically speaking, the best possible insulating materials, but there's a lot of troubles in the long term profile. In other words, you create a vacuum and the vacuum doesn't stand as a vacuum for very long. And it cannot really be suitable for application with different shapes, it cannot be punctuated, so it's kind of pretty risky to present the thing that you put the vacuum insulating panel and 5 years later the vacuum is still a vacuum. So often that doesn't happen. And so the idea is that we have been working on aerogel which do not have all these problems of the vacuum. So they're not as good as the vacuum, just to be honest, but they're way better than typical other materials. So what is an aerogel? Aerogel is a kind of a very old product, I should be honest. And in fact, its original synthesis was dated back 1931. Okay? So it's basically almost 80 years old. Okay? So it's very kind of an old product, and it's been also pretty kind of famously known as smoked air. Okay? You have this gel that at the end of the day, by removing the liquid phase, it becomes like a smoke that gets actually frozen in a solid mass. Okay? So it's translucent in kind of behaviors, and what it actually has and why it's so important, theoretically speaking, you can have a thermal conductivity as low as around 0.01 watt-meter Kelvin. Okay? It's really not like that. These days it's 0.013, 0.014, but that's the range of thermal conductivity we get with this product. The product is completely non-toxic, it's pretty light. It's actually the lightest possible material that we know. Okay? So we're speaking about things such as 50, 60, 70 kilo per cubic meter. So you have a cubic meter and you can easily kind of fluctuating with this product. Okay? Now, why this product is so good and why it's kind of attracting so much attention, and which are the limits? Because you realize every single time there is a novelty, there is always a big issue, a big challenge, a big limit. Now, this product is basically a completely porous product. Okay? So it's air. There is nothing inside it. And that's actually why it's so light and why actually it's so good in thermal conductivity behaviors. And where is actually the kind of secret of this product is that in its structure, all the network of materials are kind of aligning in small cells. Now, these small cells that are also called bands on a string, so they are kind of little chain closet. They don't allow air movement inside the cavity. So, in other words, when you have a porous material, you have a cavity. Think about any insulating material. Think about, let me show, kind of this material. Nothing more than this. Now, when I actually compress this product material, the fact that I'm able to compress it is because there is an air cavity and it's an open cavity, and when I compress, the air cavity escapes the material. Okay? Now, that air cavity transfer it through convection, and actually also transfer a lot of it to gas conduction. Okay? So the cavity basically allows some heat to move. But in an aerogel, this movement doesn't happen because the cavity cannot move from one porosity to another porosity because it's blocked. Now, this kind of product was created many, many years ago. However, it was extremely expensive, and it's still pretty quite expensive. But at that time, it was really incredibly expensive, and it was only able to be produced in many small quantities. And only actually in the last 2 decades, these products have been starting being more common. Okay? Now, aerogel is not one product. Similar to the BCMs, there are tons of different aerogels. Okay? So more than speaking about an aerogel, people should confess that they work on one kind of the big families of the possible aerogels. Because the aerogels is nothing more than kind of the capability to create a gel, not different from the gel I put on my hair this morning. Really, it's the same gel, and then evacuating the liquid part. So when I actually put the gel this morning in my hair, it was liquid. No, I was touching, it was liquid. Then I put it in my hair, and then naturally the liquid form evaporates. Okay? So there is a gel that at one point on my hair the liquid stage is not anymore there. Now the aerogel does the same thing, but when we evacuate the aerogel, basically, so when we remove the liquid part, we want actually the gel to be crystallized. We want actually the gel to be kind of in this little shape. You know that my gel in the air is now pulverized, so there is a particle here, a particle here, a particle here, a particle here. So it's not really crystal. But a gel, an aerogel is typically a gel where you have created the evacuation process and the material has been crystallized in a very regular shape. Now, to have this crystallization process happening, you basically need high pressure and high temperature. And high pressure and high temperature means high cost, because you need to create high pressure and you need to create high temperature. And the impact of this kind of process is basically to have a product that is extremely light. Depending on the process you create, you can have density from as low as 3 kg per cubic meter to as high as 300 kg per cubic meter. But it's still pretty light, typically in the range of 70. It's a common current material. Typically you want to have the material to be crystallized in particles with a diameter of 3, 4, 5 nanometer. So very, very small one. Typically you want the porosity of the material that is above 90%, typically above 95%, but we have seen actually products with porosity as high as 99%. And here it is actually the problem of these products. Typically these products are really, really fragile. So they don't have actually any strength. Have you ever seen an aerogel? Have you ever seen an aerogel or not? Okay. You want to see an aerogel?
Yes.
So you get an idea of what it is. Not my fault, okay? So look at this. So this is nothing more than an aerogel. Stick on my touch. This is a blanket of aerogel. This is the aerogel powder that you are seeing basically flying. Okay? Look at this. You see the powder? This is the aerogel. Okay? And as you can see, it's really pounded. When I speak about 2, 3, 4, 5 nanometers, you almost can see. Now, this is basically 100 nanoparticles altogether. Okay? So this is the secret of the product. I mean, you can take it. I have many samples, by the way, of different products, so you get a sense of it. Now I'm going to speak to you about this. Look at this. Touch. You can touch. It's hydrophobic, so basically it stuck on your finger because your finger there is water in your finger, there is a moisture in your finger, so it gets stuck in your finger. But it's not substance. Don't worry about it. If you touch this, it doesn't really give you the same feeling. If you touch the thickness, it will give you the thickness of the edge. Okay? Now, what's actually the problem of this product? This product is extremely fragile. If you take an aerosol in your hands, you crush, it's super easy to crush. So the problem is, how can we make actually this product something that we can use in the product, in the building industry? Okay? Now, most common application these days is either an aerogel blanket, like these ones. What is this? This is a fiberglass. You know the typical fiberglass, the pink one that you see extremely soft. And then what people have been doing with these products, basically my group, has been dipping this a fiberglass into an aerogel. So in the gel of my silica gel that you see this morning, the fiberglass collapses because the liquid form basically makes the fiberglass collapsing. Then we have evacuated the product, compressed the product, and what's happening is that the aerogel gets stuck into the fiberglass fiber structure. So this is a normal fiberglass, but then the aerogel is attached to the fiberglass structure. So we typically create blankets, we call it. Things like this. So materials that are very thin, a few millimeters, but they may have the same impact. So this one, it's basically equivalent to 5 centimeters of mineral water, rock soil. Okay? So you can do pretty good things. Well, where is the problem? Always in the cost. This one costs nowadays actually 14, 15 euro per square meter. You buy an insulating product for 2, 3 euro per square meter. Okay? So you typically have a factor of 4, 5, 6 to fill the gap between the price of these products and the price of normal insulating products. But people have been doing also, and for example, here in Perugia, Professor Berardi did kind of few studies with plastics. This is actually a guy in Umberto. Okay? So putting the fiber of the aerogel in the plaster mix, mixing together, and then spray on a wall. Now, the value of these products is that you get a super light thermal insulating plaster. Okay? And the value is, for example, that if you have a vault, think about an historic building, how can I put the polyisocyanoate or an XPS or an EPS there? I can't. But I can put the thermal insulating plaster. Now, a thermal insulating plaster typically is a thermal conductivity of 0.3. An aerogel enhanced thermal insulating plaster is a thermal conductivity of 0.2. So I basically can increase by 50% the thermal resistance of the layer by enhancing the plaster with these particles in the mix. Problem, the cost. A bag of aerogel plaster costs 22 euro these days. Okay, so 25 kilo for 22 euro. Quite expensive. Okay. People have been using blankets or panels for indoor application when the thickness of the internal insulating layers is pretty kind of important, because you don't want to put 20, 30 centimeters inside your house. But if it is a couple of centimeters, if it is 1 centimeter, if it is a millimeter, probably it's not a big deal. Think about in Italy, for example, these days, all the heating system below windows. You know, historically in Italy, when in the 70s and the 80s, we were putting actually the radiators in the apartments, we were always reducing the thickness of the wall. So these days, in the social housing built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you have a very limited thickness of the wall where the radiator is. In other words, you don't have an insulation, you don't have a thermal mass, where you have actually the radiator source. So you have actually demand to increase somehow the thickness of that wall, but you don't want the radiator in the middle of the room. So by basically putting into the back of the radiator a kind of a super insulating layer, you can achieve a quite good result. So a bit of kind of physics background. Every single time you have, don't worry, you can read at home. I just want to give you the idea of the atom. When you have a porous material, look, this is my porous material, and so I have porosity here. Think about the cheese, you know, with a hole. Okay? How they get transferred from here to here? How do I measure the heat flux into a material? So typically, when you were studying Physica Technica 1, okay, people were saying there is conduction, convection, and radiation. How many times have you used those formula? Once in a while, you remember conduction, and then you did actually, sorry, then you did convection, and then you had the area, you have this thickness, and then you have the factor of convection, and you had radiation. With a different thickness. Now, in a porous material, all these kind of things happen together. There is a matrix of solid, so there is some level of solid material into a porous product, and the heat transfer to the material. There is actually a cavity, so the heat transferred through the cavity and moves into the cavity. There is radiation because you have actually porosity, so if this side is actually warmer than this side, then there is a heat transferring through radiation. Okay? If the material is porous, like with open porosity, so with a crack, there is air can move from one side to the other. We call it tightness, and that moves some air. And with the movement of the air, there is some heat that transfers. So basically, in a porous material, there are 6 different heat transfer modes. Conduction through the solid matrix, conduction through the gas matrix, convection, radiation, air movement or air leakages, and then the coupling effect, the second order effect when the conduction couples with convection. In Physica Technica 1, you typically study the convection as a different process from the conduction, and the conduction as a different process from radiation. But in real nature, phenomena are coupled together. So conduction enhances convection and vice versa. So the different things actually are coupled all together. So typically, you have 6 different heat transfer modes. 2 conduction, 2 radiation, and 2 convection all together. Now, in an hydrogel, all these 6 transfer are minimized as much as possible. Now, you minimize the heat transfer through conduction by basically making sure that 99% of the product is porous. Okay, so you only have 1% of material, 1% of solid material. Okay, so conduction go to 0 because there is no mass. Convection go closer to 0. Why? Well, because you remember the structure of the material with kind of little hole with a lot of particles? The air cannot move from one particle to the other. And then radiation goes to 0, or closer to 0, because we add an opacifier. We add a product that has a very low radiation. And if you remember the Stefan-Boltzmann equation, radiation depends on the emissivity. And if the emissivity of the product is closer to 0, then the radiation gets closer to 0. It's a black hole. It's kind of a black body in thermodynamics 1. Okay? So, overall together, an aerogel is a perfect engineering material that stops conduction, convection, and radiation in a very good way. Okay? Now, the problem is, it took forever to have an affordable price. Okay? So, although it was invented in 1931, that's the patent, for 50 years, nobody was able to kind of reproduce this product in a cheap way. And then 20 years ago, a couple of companies, both are located very close to Boston. One is actually Aspen, the other one is called Cabot. They actually started engineering this product in an easier way. And I'm going to show you the way in which they've been doing this. And nowadays, these products are extremely kind of common, but not into the building industry, are typically in the pipeline industry. And typically are not common in application that are in our climate, but are super common in application in northern climates. If you are in Russia, and you have district heating, it becomes extremely easy to kind of cover a pipeline with steam inside with a blanket like this. Because the blanket gives you a huge kind of thermal resistance in a very thin layer in a pipe that is under the ground and there is steam inside the pipe. Okay, so the product is kind of pretty used. Just to give you the sense, this product over the last 10 years has been increasing the market year after year at a rate of 10%. So the product starts being pretty common. To give you the sense, currently the market of these products is 1 billion. Okay, so it's not huge, but it's not small. It's just not huge in the building industry. It's a bit more common in other industries. How this product gets created? Basically, you put two polymers. You mix the two polymers together in a bath, water sometimes, more commonly alcohol. So you put two polymers. These two polymers start actually condensing. You create a gel. For people doing cakes, it's no different when you put actually two polymers. It creates the gelatin for your kind of cake. Same process. Once you create actually this gel, and once the gel is pretty solid, think about to make you an example, the gel I put this morning in my hair, it's called an aged gel. In other words, the gel is fully created. Okay? It's completely gel, it's completely solid. At that time you have a gel, and then you need to do something that is extremely difficult. You have a gel that has still a wet phase inside, there is some water. You need to remove the water. Okay? In reality, you don't remove the water, you remove the alcohol, because the original time you put alcohol in the basic material. Now, if you're able to remove this wet component of the gel in a super critical way, basically what's happening is that you create crystal of materials, so beds that are really long. And this is an aerogel. Okay? It's very hard to speak in a room. If we were in a lab, I was able to show you how to do this kind of gel. It's not impossible. Okay? It's pretty easy. The problem is this one, how to dry this process. How to make sure that the drying still make actually the chain of the aerogel up. That's not super easy, okay? You need some vacuum and you need to do high pressure. Okay? So this is actually the secret step. There's also another secret step that I'm going to touch you in a while, which is which are the chemicals we are starting from. Are these chemicals expensive or are they cheap? Historically, we used very expensive chemicals, and so the gel again was very expensive. But these days we're able to do these with biomass byproducts. So the original raw material is cheaper, and so that's good. Another process, this kind of evacuation of the wet part, originally was evacuated and was lost, was evaporized. These days we say, wait a moment, this is expensive. So when I remove, I want to take it to reuse in another cycle. So the wet phase needs to serve again for another cycle of solution. And this is basically how we are working over the last few years to make aerogel a bit more cheap. Okay, so we want actually a much cheaper product. We need to use cheaper raw material, closed loop cycle, and subcritical drying. Okay? And that's the aerogel. So this is actually how to make an aerogel, what I just told you so far. It's not really impossible, it's something that chemical people can do, and they have a couple of challenges. The main one is the drying process. If you're able to do a drying process, so you remove the gel at ambient temperature and ambient pressure, then the material becomes extremely cheap. Ambient pressure is what my gel is doing in my hair since this morning. I'm just walking around Perugia and the water is escaping. Okay? Right now it's completely dry. The process done in this way unfortunately doesn't create the network of the aerogel. To create the network of the aerogel, these days we are doing ambient pressure but high temperature. So basically microwaves. Okay? We are removing the liquid in ovens, okay? And we are collecting all the liquid to be reused at another time. And what we do with that, we basically created particles like this. Okay, so I have a couple of patents for that product. That's a product that we created in my lab, basically A. And then the process is what we do with that. Okay, so a couple of characteristics. If you have seen some aerogel that, for example, Professor Berardi may have in her lab, the aerogel that you have been using is typically extremely transparent. Our aerogel, the one that we do in my lab, it's kind of not really transparent. No. Okay, the projector is not the best, but you can realize it's kind of white. Okay, it's really white. It's not really transparent. Now, the good side is this is much cheaper than the commercial one. The bad side is, do you want to use that product in a window? No, because the window doesn't really remain fully transparent. But the idea is that we can create aerogel, or we can immerse fiberglass into a gel, evacuating into a microwave the alcohol, and then we create fiberglass blankets. This one. Okay? So this is basically a fiberglass. It was 5 centimeters, put into the gel, collapsed the fiberglass structure, evacuated, compressed 8 millimeter thickness, boom, aerogel blanket with a thermal conductivity of 0.016. Okay? So this is basically what we are doing. This is again the chemical bit, and this is how we are making cheaper products. Cheaper raw material, using low vapor pressure, and drying everything at atmospheric condition. So what we do with these particles? Typically these particles in my lab we use in a lot of porous materials. Okay? So one of these is, for example, concrete. So we have created our own article, so our own aerogel, so this little particle, this little kind of sand, powder, whatever you want to call it, it's very, very fine. It's this one that you see. And then what do? We basically go to mortar and we remove some sand and we put the aerogel. Okay? If you do that, the more aerogel you put, the more this kind of concrete becomes a lightweight mortar and becomes a super thermal resistant mortar. Okay? Don't worry about photo. You have actually the PowerPoint. You have already PowerPoint. You can take the PowerPoint. Don't worry about it. So this is basically normal, classic. This is a master thesis of a student from Bologna. He visited me a couple of years ago, and the only thing he learned over his visit in Bologna was to make mortar and concrete. Okay? Putting aerogel, creating the aerogel, putting into the mortar, and this is basically the idea of this product. The idea is to have material with a thermal conductivity that is much lower than typical concrete. To give you the sense, thermal conductivity of a concrete is in the range of 1 watt-meter Kelvin. Okay? So 1. These products, these are all aerogel products, have a thermal conductivity of 0.2. In other words, 5 times more insulator than a typical mortar. Look at the order of magnitude. 10 times more conductive than an aerogel alone. So I'm not speaking that this is kind of a super insulating material. Still a concrete, it's still conductive, it's 10-20 times more conductive than an aerogel, but with respect to a typical concrete, it's kind of 5 times more insulating. So if you want to do parapets, balcony, these kind of things, it's okay. And it's okay if you see the compressive strength of our last product, basically it's above 10 megapascal. And 10 megapascal is what you typically use for a low-bearing concrete. So not the column, not the beams, but the sprawl that you put on top of floors. Okay, so there are applications that can use this kind of product. The more aerogel you put in volume, the lower becomes the thermal conductivity. Okay, so just to give you a sense, we're using in this case a super strong actually concrete. Super strong concrete easily have thermal conductivity of above 1, 1.5 up to 2. As soon as you start putting more aerogel, you start reducing significantly the thermal conductivity. Now if you look at this graph, a volume of 60% of aerogel. Now a volume of 60% means in mass, typically 2-3% of aerogel in mass. So if I have a cubic meter of concrete, 40 kilo is aerogel, but it's a huge volume. because aerogel is so light that you need to have a huge production to have it. And then that's actually the thermal conductivity you get. Okay? And here you see a bit more of the number. What typically happens once you start putting more aerogel? Well, the aerogel gets distributed into the concrete. And here you need to look at carefully what's going on. If the aerogel distributes homogeneously into the concrete matrix, so if it goes everywhere, you see this is an aerogel, you see the white. If it goes everywhere, the thermal conductivity will go very low. If it gets focused somewhere and not somewhere else, the thermal conductivity doesn't really reduce significantly. So this is basically one of the applications. Now one is plasters, what basically Professor Berardi has been doing over the last few weeks. The value of these products is that a plaster can be as light as 100–150 kilogram per cubic meter, so it's pretty light. It's a super light plaster. If you take a plaster aerogel enhanced product, it's kind of almost a rubbery. Okay? It's not really plastic. If you touch this plaster, it's concrete based. This is concrete plaster. Oh, well, this is gypsum board. It's not even concrete plaster. Okay, this is actually concrete plaster. You see, it's kind of strong, and it's not deformable. Okay? Doesn't have any flexibility. An aerogel plaster becomes like a rubbery, so it can be easily shaped around balls, kind of curved shapes, 3D shapes. And the typical value of this is that the thermal conductivity can remain as low as 0.02, 0.03 maximum. So it basically acts as a mineral wall, but it's a plaster. So think about your application in a retrofit or an historical building. You have actually a plaster that effectively has the same thermal insulation property than a mineral wall. So when you speak with the superintendent and they don't want you to put actually a mineral wall, you can say, I put plaster. The only problem is that you need to start having thickness of plaster that are more significant. So for example, there is a company from Denmark that has a special grit that will allow you to have plaster with aerogel up to 6 centimeters in thickness. So you typically don't put 6 centimeters of thickness inside application, but if that's actually going to be your thermal insulating layer, probably that's the thickness that you start considering. So this is another another PhD thesis that we did. Actually, this is a master thesis, and this is kind of different hydraulic plaster from Italy or from Canada. So different hydraulic plaster, so different actually cement basic plaster with different percentage of aerogel. 25, 50, 70, and I have many more photos if you want to see. And if you see, typically the plaster when it is without aerogel is very compact, okay? It's very finished. As soon as you start putting more aerogel, the surface becomes rough. And there is this porosity of the aerogel that remains there. So, you see what's going on? Okay, so probably return on. Can we actually undo by hand?
Should be like beneath the, no, it's automatic, it's beneath the
Oh yeah.
blackboard.
Sorry, my fault. So at least you see a bit better. And you probably don't sleep too much. Okay, if you start seeing actually the SEM picture of the aerogel, you see this particle of the aerogel spread around the network of the plaster. Okay? So a couple of things that we have been doing with these products. Because these are plaster, we typically use it internally to building. And so the hydrothermal performance of these products is pretty important because typically when you do internal insulating layers, people tell you always, oh, you got a condensation issue. You put internal insulation, the thermal vapor gets enhanced, then the condensation gets actually problematic because that layer will go more easily to the water vapor pressure at the saturation level. So you got actually internal condensation when you put an insulation from inside. So one of the kind of studies we've been doing is looking at the vapor permeability of these products and look at the degradation once this product gets wet. Because we need to take the risk of putting actually this situation. Now just to give you the sense of the results, these are actually the product we were working. This is just a kind of a very summary series of the results. These are actually in percentage the volume of hydrogen, and these are the thermal conductivity. Okay, so you typically start with an hydraulic plaster around 0.2, 0.3. By putting 50%, 60% of hydrogen, you get a thermal conductivity of 0.02. So in order of magnitude, still plaster, but it's 10 times more insulated. If you want to graphically look at that, that's basically what's happening. You start from a product that is highly conductive, and as soon as you put more hydrogen, you start actually getting a product that is pretty highly insulated. Okay, so this is much better than a mineral wool. Rock wool, the typical rock salt mineral wool that you use, has a thermal conductivity in the range of 0.035. Okay, so these are products that are better than a mineral wool, but it's a plaster, so you can use it as a finishing layer. And these are some of the results. Okay, so I'm going to show you hydrothermal performance to give you the sense of this product. So to give you the sense, this is the blue line is the plaster without hydrogen, and each line is once you start putting more hydrogen. Okay. So first of all, something that you probably are, and this is a topic that we will touch tomorrow more extensively. But you know, when people speak about thermal conductivity and look at the heat conduction Fourier equation, they think about this product, this property, as the thermal conductivity of a product, and this is typically something you find on the technical sheet. If you think about one value, so concrete thermal conductivity in 1 bar meter Kelvin, fiberglass 0.04 bar meter Kelvin. So you think about one property. In reality, every material has tons of different thermal conductivity for at least 2 characteristics. First of all, at different temperature, the thermal conductivity changes. Why? Why actually a product has different thermal conductivity at different temperature? So that means actually any simulation we do has some level of mistakes, because we put one value of thermal conductivity while a product at 0 degrees or at 10 degrees or 20 degrees or 40 degrees has different thermal conductivity. Why thermal conductivity is temperature dependent? Well, okay, let's change a bit. Why thermal conductivity is moisture content dependent? What's happening into a material if I put more water? Conducts more or less? So if I have a dry material, okay, porous material like my tile, okay, then I drop some water on top of it. What's happening to the thermal conductivity of my final tile? Sorry?
Increases.
Yeah, increase the thermal conductivity. And the reason why increase the thermal conductivity is because the porosity of my tile, of the tissue of my tile, gets basically absorbing water. The air escapes and gets replaced by water. And the water is more thermal conductor than the air. Okay? So instead of having a porosity of air, you get actually a drop of water. Okay? The water is more thermal conductive. The result of the thermal conductivity of my tile will be high. Okay? Now, so that basically means the more moisture content, the more thermal conductivity. Fair enough. So when you use it to do the Glaser methods for evaluating condensation risk in a wall, you should have corrected the thermal conductivity of your model when you were finding condensation. Because that condensation, there is some humidity in that wall. So the thermal conductivity of that layer will have been different from the one that you theoretically anticipated. But there is another problem that depends on temperature. So here there is air, huh? So if you go back to physics 1, probably, okay, what is the temperature of a body? What is the temperature? When I say 20 degrees, what does it mean?
393.
Okay, and what does it mean? Okay, let's go differently in terms of, what does it mean 0 Kelvin?
You have no motion in particles.
No motion. And if I actually increase the temperature, what's happening to my particles? They're starting moving more. Okay? What that means is that higher temperature, my particles will start moving more, and the convection of the air of the gas phase of a material, it's actually easier and faster and more important because the motion of the particle is higher. At 0 Kelvin, thermodynamics tells me particle stops, it's not the temperature I can reach, and so I will not have that much motion. In other words, at that level, the thermal conductivity will be really minimal because the particles do not have the strength to move. Okay? So, typically for a product, the higher the temperature, and this is something we will touch again tomorrow, the higher the thermal conductivity. Okay? So we typically say the thermal conductivity of a product is one value because we typically measure the thermal conductivity of a product at a given temperature and a given relative humidity content. But as soon as we change the temperature and as soon as we change the relative humidity content or the moisture content, then the thermal conductivity will change. Okay? Now this is something we will come back tomorrow because we do a lot of monitoring in real field, and you realize that the same wall may have a thermal conductivity of one value in winter and of a different value in summer. Simply because in summer it gets dried, but then it gets kind of an higher temperature. So it's important to see how these kind of two things actually affect the behaviors of the material. So look at this. This is actually the moisture content, so how much moisture, basically, water drops, water vapor drops, a material like a plastic can sustain. So these are typically hygroscopic curves, you know, so how much actually moisture plastic can take. And you see, typically aerogel plaster are hydrophobic. That's the reason why they attach to your finger. The reason why this fiberglass attached to your finger is because it's super dry. So it takes actually the water of your finger and stuck actually in your finger. That's why I need to, at this point, wash my hands, okay? But then as soon as you overcome the critical point, they start actually taking a huge amount of moisture. Now, if you look at kind of other application of this aerogel, so basically one of the things we've been doing is making sure that this becomes a super water vapor permeable plaster with aerogel. And the reason why we want to have a vapor permeable plaster is because you use internal application and the water vapor can flow through the wall without basically risking any condensation into the wall. And on the other side, we want to make sure that even if the product sustains high relative humidity, 80–90%, it still doesn't collapse the aerogel. So the product basically doesn't have risk of mold, doesn't have risk of biodegradation for those kind of products. This is a couple of aerogel samples, and the reason why I'm showing you, because one of the things we have been using this aerogel is for fenestration kind of systems. Remember the house I was showing you before? One of the things I haven't told you is that all these windows were aerogel windows. Okay? All the atrium was completely aerogel covered. And one of the things we have been doing is, for example, using monolithic aerogel into typically New England windows. So probably it's not really super kind of easy to see from you, but these are all preserved of the courthouse of Boston. So this is the city of Boston. Here you see actually the windows, and this is the final variation of the aerogel that we selected. We basically changed the kind of historical window to this kind of final windows. Okay, and this is the lighting monitoring. Here you have the lighting person, as you can be probably interested in looking at. If you refer to the paper, you will see the impact of the different windows. Okay. Now, the thing that we've been more successfully working on, because we've been commercializing, is the aerogel blanket. Okay. So an aerogel blanket basically means the aerogel is fragile. Basically, it's kind of easy to compress and destroy. So put the gel into a blanket, dry the blanket, and get something that you can go to the field and the carpenter or the people on the field can actually use more effectively. Now, this is not only something that we have been doing at Ryerson. Around the world, there are 6–7 different research centers working on aerogel blankets. Only one of these is currently on the market. Okay? The only one on the market is this one. Okay? The other one are research stage products. Okay? What they typically do is basically providing you layers with thermal conductivity as low as 0.013, 0.014. So very kind of highly insulating layers, okay? Now this is to give you the sense of the current state of the thermal conductivity of this product. To give you the sense, a concrete has a thermal conductivity of 1, so it's kind of 10 times higher than this. Okay? Mineral wool, the one that you typically use for insulation, fiberglass, have typically thermal conductivity of this value. But look at the thermal conductivity of this product. And this is curves that tomorrow we will see much more, because we often use these kind of curves for kind of district heating, district cooling, these kind of things. Thermal conductivity, the value you're typically using, is the value at 24 degrees. Okay? So let me zoom in so you see. Typically you see the thermal conductivity of a product around this temperature. Okay? According to a standard, 518, ICM standard at 518. So you typically look at the thermal conductivity of this value. But there are a lot of products that have thermal conductivity much lower than the fiberglass we have seen so far. And typically this is the trend of these blankets. Okay? So they basically have thermal conductivity in the range of 0.13, 14. This one is this white one. This is actually the only one that is on the market is that one, which is this blue one. This one, which is our Ryerson one, is this one. And then these two are two Japanese and Chinese brands. Okay? But these are labs in University of Tokyo and University of Energia. Couple of things that we have been doing with these products, which is something that connects to your previous colleagues' studies. We have been looking at these products over years, okay, long-term monitoring of this. Okay? So this typically has been happening by looking at the impact of different factors on plaster, blankets, concrete, all the possible aerosol products that we have been doing. Okay? And typically that has required temperature fluctuation, because if you use a plaster in Toronto, you know, the same plaster needs to sustain -30, -40 in winter and +40, +50 in summer. We've been looking at the effect of high radiation, so +60, +70 degrees, because that's a pretty common temperature, for example, for roof. If you have a concrete tile that goes on the roof, 70 degrees is not something hard to achieve in summer. And then high humidity and high UV. And the reason why that is kind of valuable or important to know is because the ultraviolet typically destroy the aerosol bands. Okay? So the chain of aerosol can be easily kind of affected by a lot of UV radiation. Okay? So we have been working on the lab by looking at different kind of aging studies. Now, just to give you the sense of how these studies typically get done, okay, very, very briefly, just to give you the sense, because it may be useful for you looking at these products. Typically, we put materials at a higher temperature than the typical environment, or we put at conditions such as more relative humidity, or we put the condition with high exposure to ultraviolet, or we put materials into deformation of temperature, so up and down in temperature range, and see what's happening to the dilatation of the product. So what we actually expect is that the plaster, if basically dilates and contracts, at one point it starts cracking. Okay? So we study the effect on the long-term performance of a plaster in simulated kind of condition. Now this is something that here, for example, you do in Italy, in Europe in general, you do because you are interested, but in Canada you have to. There is not a building product that can be built and put on the market if it doesn't go through a full characterization test of the long-term characteristics. And the reason for this, just to give you the sense of the difference with Italy, for example, is that in North America, everything is under insurance. Your house is under insurance. Your health it's under an insurance. There is nothing that happens in North America without an insurance. Now, if you have an insurance company, you don't want to put an insurance and a mortgage on a house unless it gets certified. So it's not like in Italy that it's not common to have an insurance on a house, or the insurance doesn't cover the materials that have been used into the building. In Canada, when they put actually an RS building and they put the new product, the assurance wants to have confirmation and the product is not going to suffer a long-term issue. Okay? So typically we do a lot of these studies in our lab because it's pretty common to have, you know, kind of issues with insurance companies.
Do you do that with time scaling, or do you actually reproduce real timing?
No, you can't reproduce real timing because it will take forever. So you need to kind of simulate similar stress with typical factor. Now, how do you do that, basically? You typically do two things. And our lab is certified to do both things. One thing is inside the lab, the other thing is kind of in a stressed outdoor condition. So inside the lab, what we do is basically, let's presume that, you know, this kind of plaster used on the parapet of your balcony gets exposed to 1 hour of ultraviolet in the range of 500, 600 nanometer per day. Okay? So what you do is you typically calculate theoretically in your location, so in Toronto, how much exposure to ultraviolet it gets in 1 year. Then you typically estimate what's the life of this product, so a parapet 30 years, 20 years. Then you try to contract the same exposure in a more condensed time in your lab. Okay? How do you do this? It's basically, you need to know the activation energy of the product. What is the activation energy? Is the bond of a material, like when you have any material, my tissue, I'm completely dirty in my hands, but you know, every 2 molecules of a material are linked together, okay? To break the link, you need an activation energy, okay? It's the activation energy that you basically provide to a material. For example, when you're cooking something in your oven, you provide some energy to break the link and soften the material, okay? So every material, depending on the chemistry of the bond of the molecular structure, has an activation energy. Okay? The activation energy depends on basically the molecule that you are using. So you calculate the activation energy of the product, and this is something that a chemistry prof will easily give you. And then you provide to that material an equivalent stress component in a shorter amount of time. So instead of having, you know, 1 hour ultraviolet for 20 years, you give to the material 2 weeks of ultraviolet non-stop. Okay? Now, the challenging is that to know how long you need to stress the material in your lab to have an equivalent effect of what is going to happen in the real field, you need first of all to understand what is the condition in the real field. Just to give you an example. Look at this parapet. Okay, the balcony has plaster on this side and plaster on the other side. The plaster on the external side gets more ultraviolet than on the internal side. Okay? In other words, the plaster on the external side will deteriorate, will destroy, will crack faster than the internal side. And you know that. You know that the balcony will always destroy on the external side and not on the internal side. So what you need to know is, studying a building, understand what's the kind of element in your building that it's more in a situation to fail, to study the failure mechanism of that element, and then to replicate in your lab in an accelerated way. Just to give you another example, you go to a roof, you know that roof will have a lot of UV radiation. Okay, summertime, temperature is basically 60, 70, 80 degrees easily on a roof. Okay? And you know that at that time, with 80 degrees, the material is very dilated. Okay? It's very open. So that what actually happens when a material is dilated is that all the smog or particles of pollution gets more easily sucked into that product. So you need to replicate into a lab in the equivalent condition that is done actually in those kind of things. Now, to give you the sense of how these kind of things are done, if you're interested in long-term studies, there are different ways. Okay? This is the one that is most commonly used in my lab. Okay? They are kind of QV machines, which are, you know, kind of ultraviolet accelerated machines. They are protocols. This one works with a STM 154, to give you an example. So it's an STM standard, typically used for tissue, typically used for clothes. Okay? The clothes, before going to the market, needs to be certified. Okay? Building products do not really need that kind of full characterization, but there is no limit to do the same kind of thing. So for example, here you see the aerogel plaster, here you see the aerogel blankets. tested with different range. And what is happening in this machine, for example? Well, in this machine, if you open this kind of bench, there are 4 different things. There are UV lamps. So we change the lamps according to the condition that we want to study, and we kind of accelerate the UV exposure of that product. Just to give you the sense of this. If I am in London, I know it's cloudy. And so the cloudiness will take some UV and will actually allow only other radiation to escape. If you come to Toronto, it's always fully clear sky. Okay? Toronto is, the sun is sitting in Canada. That's why people 300 years ago moved to Toronto. Okay? Because they know that in that valley is always sunny. Okay? So the lamp that you need to use to simulate the sky of Toronto is different from the lamp that you need to use to simulate the sky in London. So first of all, it's climate dependent. But you have lamps, and you can program, and you can put actually the UV radiation you want. For example, if you come to London, you probably use radiation in a range of 1.1, 1.2 baht per square meter. If you come actually to Toronto, you easily use it 1.3, 1.4 baht per square meter. Because in fully sky today, July the 2nd, you get actually easily 1300 baht per square meter of radiation. So first of all, you need to understand you're doing an aging for which location. Number 1. Number 2, this is a UV lamp. What other characteristics may affect the long-term kind of characteristics and life of this product? So typically in our climate, it's freezing condition. Actually freezing condition with humidity. What happens is when there is moisture into the material in winter time will freeze, will expand the volume and will crack. And in fact in Canada we do a lot of freeze-thaw cycles, which means we basically humidify a product with snows, water on top of it, and then we ask the material to go -5 + 5, -5 + 5, -5 + 5 many times. Because we know that that mechanism is pretty dangerous and pretty common. If you are in Vancouver, for example, one typical test we do when we do actually test for Vancouver is horizontal rain kind of on facades. Because we know that in Vancouver, it's on the coast and there is a lot of actually freezing rain coming. Okay? So it rains a lot. Typically Vancouver is the city with the highest percentage of rain days. It's fully wonderful place. But when it starts raining, it's like London, 1 month of rain. And it's raining from the ocean, so with a lot of wind, with horizontal raining. Okay? So you need to understand the mechanism that is failing in that location, and then you accelerate with a higher dose. It's like a doctor making the same kind of test on mice. So what they do is they take an animal and they give the same dose in a more focused way with a higher concentration, and you see the effect on the animal. We do the same thing with products, okay? We need to start understanding if it is, for example, just to give you an example, this is a freezing thaw cycles. So this is a machine that does it basically goes from -5 to +5 on average, but we can do also tests from -20 to +20. So this is a kind of the climate chamber gets controlled and we do up and down. This machine, for example, does UV radiation and does rain penetration. So we spray water on top of the material and we see actually the effect of water. We also do outdoor tests, the ones that I was showing you before in that kind of machine, the BTOC machine on the roof, which is not differently from what you can do here using the 2 cubicles that you have. The problem of the cubicles is that they work perfectly for Perugia, but you need many years, and they probably don't replicate the situation that you may have in Syracuse, not Syracuse, New York. Okay? So the radiation that you can have here is different from the radiation that you can have there. That's basically where the lab starts being more interesting, because you can replicate with the dose effect whatever you want to recreate once you know the activation energy and you know the distance between the condition you're testing and the condition the material is going to be applied. Now pay attention, look at this table. This is a table that I developed for the plaster study in Toronto. And elevated temperature, just to give an example, 20 years of elevated temperature were simulated with 68 days in our climate chamber. Okay? Freeze-thaw cycles happening 20 years were simulated with 170 days in a machine that does the same freeze-thaw cycles in 6 hours. Now, where is the tricky aspect of this? Is that I need 6 months to simulate the effect of freeze-thaw cycles in Toronto. But if this was actually a simulation done for, like a lab test done for Perugia, probably freeze-thaw cycles here are happening once a year, twice a year. So in my machine, instead of needing under 70 days to simulate 20 years, I will probably need only 1 week to simulate the same number of cycles happening in 20 years. In other words, this convective factor, which are typically called the accelerating factor, under 70, 42, 69, 20, 65, are depending on the final application and depending on the final location where you put this. Not at the micro scale, also at the micro scale. The plaster on the external side of your balcony will require a different accelerating factor from the plaster that you are using internally to your house. Because your internal plaster will probably never undergo a freeze-thaw cycle. You will never go to -2 inside your building. So the risk of freezing humidity in your internal plaster, it's equal to 0. Does that answer your question? So it's kind of always depending on where you are doing, which is the good side and the bad side. It's the good side because you can do a lot of application, different customer can ask you different questions, case by case is different. You know, theoretically speaking, there is always more challenging to solve. The problem on the other side is that you do a study, you pretend to obtain a result, but because it's case dependent, you cannot easily generalize that conclusion to another case. In fact, one of the typical aspects that we are doing these days with the government is that last year was 150 years anniversary of Canada, and so the government put a huge amount of money to help the Aboriginal population of Canada. So when Europe and United States people went to Toronto, Montreal, the Aboriginal people basically escaped towards the Nordic part of Canada. Okay? So they are living in isolated community in the middle of nowhere, where it's not even easy to have access to them, and they're living there. Okay? So the government of Canada these days is putting a huge amount of resources, and they're extremely poor, you know, they don't have access to electricity, they burn whatever they have in order to, you know, kind of create some comfortable condition inside their house. Children do not go to schools, you know, so there are situations with a lot of social aspects. And so the government of Canada last year put a huge amount of funds available to basically asking us to create new materials to help them sustaining a better life. Okay? And the first thing we thought, okay, we have no idea about the climate condition of it. And so the first thing we had to start looking at, what's the kind of characteristics the Mayalo has to simulate the effect that is happening closer to the North Pole. Because you have no idea about that, okay? And in fact, you know, aerogel, just to give you an example, one of the first few applications of aerogel in the 70s was in the astronaut jackets. We still use it for clothes. Because it's so kind of insulator as a material that has been still used these days actually for clothing application in extreme temperature conditions. Something that you don't know, but you know, when we buy shoes or jackets, we buy for given temperature. So you buy the shoes for given temperature, or shoes for another temperature, or shoes for another temperature, because they got actually different insulating layers in the tissue. So these are, for example, the results of the plastics. Okay, and then I'm going to show you the results for the blankets and the other products. So this is the impact of elevated temperature, the impact of freeze-thaw cycles, the impact of high humidity and high moisture content, or the impact of UV exposure with the other things together. Okay? So this is kind of an heavily lab-based series of studies. Here you see the effect after 0, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, equivalent, okay? But we only took 6 months to do this study, okay? We didn't have to wait 20 years. So plasters in Canada needs to be certified for 20 years exposure. It's called an LLTR standard. There's a real standard that obliges all the insulating products to be tested for long-term resistance. Okay? So the government asks any manufacturer to basically declare the R value, which means the thermal conductivity when the material is fresh, and the R value, which means the thermal conductivity when the material is aged, is old. Okay? So look at what's happening. Typically, the product, the more actually goes with the time, the more it will crack more and the more the thermal conductivity will increase. And that's easy. That tells me that the model works, okay? The material that starts cracking allows more moisture to enter. The more moisture enters, the more it degrades faster. It's like going to a plaster facade, and once the plaster facade starts getting cracked, it cracks over and over and over more quickly. That makes sense. Now if you see the impact, so always remember pure plaster, 25%, 50, 70, 80, 90% of hydrogen. Okay, so these are all plaster where we have started putting more hydrogen and we have started basically stressing the material with high temperature or more freeze-thaw cycles or more relative humidity. Okay? Now just to show you the results. When the material is poured, so a normal plaster, the plaster you use here in Perugia, typically what you have is that high temperature do not create that much troubles, but they have an increase in thermal conductivity. High moisture creates a lot of troubles, and you understand that. The material gets a bit more kind of wet, the thermal conductivity will increase, and it will increase even more when high humidity gets combined with a lot of UV. Fair enough. Okay, now if you look at this, what you start realizing is that the fully aerogel plaster with 90% of aerogel basically is flat across the different conditions. In other words, it doesn't get aged at all. The reason it doesn't get aged at all because it doesn't conduct a lot of heat. So it doesn't dilate a lot and doesn't crack at all. Now look also at the number. This product 0.14, so pretty kind of highly thermal conductive, 0.04, 0.04, 0.04. So we are basically speaking about a material that is 3-4 times more thermal insulating than kind of a traditional product, but we're also speaking about a product that is completely stable, no matter what kind of cycle you affect. Okay? So this is a similar study we have been doing with not just with plaster, but also with blanket, with fiberboard, with gypsum boards. Now I don't have time, and probably you're already tired enough about this kind of studies, but this is a significant portion of what we've been doing. Taking a material, creating a cycle of real test conditions, and looking at the impact of that product. And you typically have to do these kind of studies every single time you create your own aerogel and you want to commercialize this product. Because the customer at the end of the day wants to know if that material is safe to be used. One of the interesting things when it comes to buildings is that nobody likes failures, because failures means cost. And especially in North America, with the insurance wall behind building, like nobody wants to have any single risk of failures in that kind of environment. So just to give you a very summary of the study, these are different products, plasters, blankets, fiberboard, gypsum boards, and this is the reduction in thermal conductivity for different mechanisms. So for the high temperature, for freeze-thaw cycle, for humidity, for UV humidity. And you see what kind of product suffer the most. Okay? So typically you have a plaster, a normal plaster, cement-based plaster, suffers quite a lot relative humidity and suffers even more relative humidity with UV. And then you have more highly insulating plaster then a very little reduction of these kind of risks. Now, so this is another good way to sell these products. Not only to kind of compare them in terms of pristine conditions, so not aged new material conditions, but as kind of condition after 20 years. In other words, the lifelong value of this product enhance even more the benefit that you can see the first time. Couple of other small applications and then we stop if you are okay. One, how do you use these products in real buildings? Okay, so one of the study we have been doing over the last couple of years is how do we put PCMs or aerogel products in real buildings. Now I do the thermal conductivity in a neat flow meter in a knot box. Nice picture, nice material, nice application. I go to the site. This is a picture of Toronto last month, okay? What do you see? I don't know if you see that well. Yeah, you see that well. Okay. Very well. This is a tower that was under construction in front of my building. This is the new Toronto hospital that is under construction. What's going on?
Why only part of the building?
Okay, so this is typically in Toronto. Toronto is kind of, there is a new regulation in Toronto. They used to do 100% windows to wall ratio of glass. Okay, so curtain wall attached to the bit of the concrete slab. And then, we made enough noise and say, well, wait a moment. The window, even the best possible window, in terms of thermal performance, is always weaker than a opaque wall. Okay, so you need to create into the code a way to stop the windows to wall ratio. Fair enough. They introduced it. But people were so kind of happy with this cladding wall that they started basically making windows to wall ratio 100% in some part and then opaque wall in some other. Okay? And that's typically what they do these days. They have see this house? This is once they close the cladding. So they put the windows, and then they put the metal panel on what it's supposed to be the opaque part. The opaque part is still glass from inside, just there is a black panel behind it. Okay? But there's another interesting thing looking at this, is that even if we dream in our lab, the flow meter value of 0.01 of the aerogel or whatever, hard value of 20, 30, these days in Canada there is a huge attention towards passive house and all the kind of standards, requirements of that. The reality is you go to the field, this is real buildings, you start seeing this. Start seeing, first of all, then you have a lot of thermal breach everywhere. So the pieces of insulation are really minimal. So what's really the thermal conductivity of that piece once you understand it is all that thermal breach? And if that's not enough, people to facilitate the application, they basically punctuate with steel guns the material to attach the insulator to the back. Okay? These are steel guns fastening. Okay? Pum, pum, pum. With a gun, they basically put this nail in the middle of the insulation. So the mineral wall, fair enough, is kind of with a thermal conductivity of 0.03, 0.04. But then, this is 30 centimeter and this is probably a meter. So in 0.3 meter squared of insulating material, there are 4 sides of aluminum bar, like a huge breach, basically, thermally. And if that's not enough, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 nails of steel, okay, in this piece. Just because, when you're building a construction that is, 50, 60 floors high, the typical application is guns everywhere, okay? To make sure that that insulation is not going to move at all, okay? But unfortunately, how easy is to kind of look at this at the design stage. How is this to control this? How do you apply an aerogel? How do you apply this to a wall? Just to be honest. As soon as you start punctuating it to attach to a real wall, you are creating a point thermal bridge. Okay? Now, because people do not trust these products, they put a lot of guns. A lot of nail means a lot of fastening, means taking this theoretically perfect thermal insulator and destroying it with an application that is completely kind of meaningless, I would say. So this is, for example, a bit of study we did last year, where we started kind of look at the impact of many different fasteners per square meter and what's the result of it. Now, to give you a typical application, here in Italy, the typical ratio is from 2 to 4 connecting points per square meter. Okay? Now, going back to this, if these are 14 nails, and this is a third of a square meter, this has 40 different nails in one single square meter. So at the end of the day, the thermal conductivity of this portion is the thermal conductivity of this steel. Thermal conductivity of steel, 200 watt per square meter per Kelvin, forget about the aerogel. Just to give you the sense, if this is a mineral wall, but if this was kind of aerogel blanket, you will add 0.01 here and then 200 here. So 4 orders of magnitude higher. Okay? And unfortunately, this is what typically happens still these days. Okay? So, a lot of the attention these days in our lab is okay, not only study the product, not only developing this product, but also try to go to the field, monitoring these products, try to detail how people need to use these products. One of the problems, for example, here, just to give you an example, is that it's raining, the mineral wool gets exposed, then one day the general contractor decides to clap it with this black panel, and this product remains inside completely wet. You see, the construction is going up. This tower is already kind of 60 floors, but the podium, the first 10 floors, was exposed for 3-4 months to the windy and chilly of -20 in Toronto. And then one day, they decide to clap it and they close it, and whatever humidity is in the material remains trapped there. Okay? So this is, how things get done. This is an hospital, you see? They put actually all the bricks here, they went up all the floors, but the ground floor is still like this. And then one day they will arrive with this glass, they will put this glass on top of it, and this is going to be wet, it will remain wet for 3-4 years until it basically evaporates internally. Because this will dry out internally, not externally. Once you trap with the glass, the vapor permeability of the glass is always going to be lower than the vapor permeability of the gypsum board that is behind this. So it will always dry out internally to the building. Okay? So one of the things that we have been doing is trying to look at the impact of kind of applications and what really that means. And the reason why I'm just going to show this last kind of slide is because for a lot of these highly enhanced materials, the reality is one thing is the lab and the 0.01 bar that we measure in the lab. The other one is actually the real conditions. So those are pictures taken from buildings we went and we evaluate. What's going to be the thermal conductivity of a wet insulating material? What's going to be the thickness? For example, a fiberglass has a thermal conductivity that relies on the thickness. But if the material gets wet, it collapses. And it's not elastic, it doesn't go back. So once it collapses and basically gets compressed and becomes this thickness, even if you dry out, it doesn't go back as it is. It's typically like a paper. If the paper gets wet, when you dry, it's not elastic, it doesn't really go to the original shape. And so the idea is, what can we do to protect the products and to make sure that the product will always have the property that we anticipated it should have? And what can we do in order to make sure to at least be aware or what realistically could be the condition of the product in a field once some failure mechanism happens. Okay? So what are we going to do tomorrow is basically we're going to start looking at effective conductivity, which means for materials that are a bit more familiar to you, like polyurethane, XPS, CPS, and other products. What's the impact of real field conditions on the material properties? Okay? Question, doubts, curiosity, whatever you have.